Hey folks, just going to give people a chance to get into the room. How's everyone doing? I assume everyone has had a productive 2 days, of course, since you last saw me. All right. Hello, hello. Let me know if this music is too loud. All right, so just to hang out while I work tonight. This is going to be a neat one because I think a couple of people might be joining me in a little bit. And I'm working on one of my favorite spreads from Dreamside. Show you some cool tricks. Hello, Mary. Hello, Helena. Hello, Diane. Now, would that be Helena or Helena? Or Helena? Or... I never know if I'm pronouncing people's names properly. Just checking to see if a couple of people might be joining us. And then I'll get back to work here. All right. Okay. Hey, check out what I'm making. This is a work in progress. It is a remake of one of the spreads, as are a lot of the pieces that I'm working on these days are kind of fixing up spreads from Dreamside before. And this one is kind of special because it's a really key moment in the story. Lacking the texts, what's basically happening here is we're seeing Sarah in her patient room, and she's drawing in her sketch pad here. And this is a reflection of the things that she saw in her dream, which is what you see in chapter 1. This takes place in chapter 2. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on here. Some of you may have seen the original video that I produced for this, so you might know the story of what's happening here, but now you can see what it looks like as a page spread. So this is, when you see these wide images like this, these are page spreads, left and right side of the page, and just imagine down the middle that that's where the book folds. So I need to leave room for things like text and a little bit of extra room around the edge for when the pages get chopped down so that they can be clipped to size for the book. You always have to leave a little bit of room for that. So what you're seeing here is kind of how the whole thing's constructed. And I've done this enough now that I can roughly estimate where I need everything to be. So I don't really work with rulers. I kind of get the pages where they need to be. And we just kind of go from there. All right. Mary asks, when drawing a character, how do you draw in their style? Yeah, it's tricky. I assume you mean, how do you keep things consistent? So if you have a character, how do you keep it looking the same? Or do you mean developing a specific character style? Or do you mean trying to draw a character that already exists and trying to mimic the style? If you can clarify that for me, I can give you a better answer. So anyway, what I was working on just before I set up the stream, I'm going to turn off a few layers here, and you can kind of see how I construct this. And then I'm going to get back to what I was doing. So one of the interesting tricks here is you can see how this looks without the color temping. I haven't finished the buildings in the background here. There's a lot of stuff I still have to do on this page. You get to see it develop. But if I turn off the shadow, and I'm just left with the base colors, this is kind of what it looks like. So these are the actual colors of her room. So she has this kind of greenish blue. Now it's there's a lot of gradient work going on here. When you would paint a wall, of course, you wouldn't paint it with all of these variations in tone. But Dreamside uses a kind of a whimsical coloring style where the colors will gradate between different tones, so similar tones. So the wall just kind of has a general bluish color, and that includes greens, it includes purples, and that sort of thing. But in this case, I have a sunset scene. So this is getting toward the end of the day. So a couple of things to make it look a bit more like a sunset scene. The first is that my base shadows, which are here, are colored this sort of purple red color. So when you see the shadows, they contain a bit of that tone and give it a little bit of a warmth, a little bit of a red tone. And then I actually have a second layer of shadows that go here. I'm still working on this one. And one thing I'm going to show you that's really cool, I didn't get to talk about last time, but is a bounce light layer. That's really neat stuff. And then I have just this, see this big red rectangle here? This is an overlay layer that goes over everything. And you can see how that just instantly warms it up and makes it look like the entire atmosphere has changed a bit and is now a warm sunset environment. So it's when I color things, I color them both for the purpose of representing the realistic environment that you're seeing, but I also color based on the story needs and the emotional state of whatever's going on the page. So at this moment in this chapter, this is kind of a weird one to start with to show you because it's sort of mid toward the end of the chapter. Previously, you saw a number of spreads of Sarah walking through the hospital, including the one that I had on the last live stream. And in that, she is sort of seeing just we're seeing the casual day-to-day experience of what it's like to stay in the hospital long term, like Sarah is. And there's a little bit of a coldness to it. It's not literally cold in the sense that I'm using very blue tones or anything like that, but it kind of lacks the sort of magical warmth. And that warmth and that sort of increased intensified color is something that we see pop in with this spread, because when Sarah is drawing and when she's creating and she's sort of melding her mind with that of Dreamside, the colors will become more vivid, they'll become more intense. There's more emotion present in the artwork, and more of a pleasant emotion. And so I want to represent that with some kind of intense colors. But I don't want to go too crazy because she's still in the real world here. This is not actually Dreamside. So I don't want it to be too crazy, just enough to represent that at this moment in time, she's able to kind of break through the sort of cold, sterile environment, and she's able to represent the more kind of warm emotional state that she has when she goes to Dreamside. So I'm going to get right in here because I've got a bit of coloring work to do, and I'm also doing some shading and I'm doing some bounce light, and so we're going to do all that today. So I'll start with something really easy. I've got to color these markers. You notice that she's holding a number of markers here, so I've got the ones that she's holding here in her hand up here. So I want to be consistent with this. This is the kind of thing that makes sure that the reader is getting a sense of continuity between illustrations, because we're seeing the flip side. This is one angle, right? And then we're continuing to this panel, which is obviously using this kind of vignette style that is not broken up into its own panel, but the idea is hopefully it's clear to the reader that when they get down to the bottom right, that this is another panel basically that's showing what she's drawing. So the markers down here, I want to make sure that they have different colors because they probably wouldn't have two of the same color. So it's almost like she had a marker set that she opened up and dumped out, um, and she's just drawing. And she's sitting in her window, as you can see here. So I stretched the this is a little unrealistic, someone being able to sit in a windowsill. There really aren't too many of them, but I really like the vision that Sarah likes to sit in the window and kind of look out. There's something very cool about that, and it's got a kind of Peter Pan feeling to it. So I exaggerated the um, this wall shape here so that she would have enough room to sit against the window. And I've got to do a couple of things like put some effects on this to make it look like she's on the other side of glass. And we'll kind of figure that out a little bit. I've got these lines in here that indicate where the glass itself would be. And of course, since she's in a big apartment, she's in a big hospital, high above the ground, the glass would have to be, extremely secure. So things like that, thinking about how this would actually be structured so it would be safe and she wouldn't, lean on the window and have it shatter and fall out. Okay, so I'm going to get right to coloring these markers. And while I do that, I'll try to answer the question that came up, which is about keeping style consistent. And I think a lot of that comes down to just practicing with your characters. I mean, if you get used to drawing them, the more practice you have, just the better off you'll be. Try to establish some kind of anchor points with your character. For example, maybe you have a character that has, a very cartoony design. Okay, so maybe the character has these little dot eyes or something like that. So I'll just do something here real quick. So let's just say that you had a character that had like kind of a round Charlie Brown head and these little dot eyes like that, right? And maybe what you do is for this character, you have a little nose like that. Okay. Um, to keep it consistent, you could set a rule that that this nose intersects right on the line where the eyes are for the most part. So regardless of how you're drawing, you set these little rules like that and try to find them wherever you can. Okay, the rule is going to be whenever I have this nose that's going to help me find the eyes. And think about the space between the eyes. Maybe if this is drawn from the front view instead, I have like the eyes here, and then we know we need another one here. So I have to establish how much space is there, between the nose and the eyes, like that. How far apart are the eyes? Because this is one of those things that can really change the appearance of a character depending on how you draw them. And it's important to sort of create these rules and set them for yourself so that they're easy to follow. See what I mean? Something like this would be like, okay, the character has this little hair doodad, maybe that's up at the top of his head. And you can set these rules. Say like maybe this character has kind of a Charlie Brown squiggle, and it's like, okay, it's got this Charlie Brown squiggle, and it kind of like lines up with the eyes like this. And so you sort of set these rules for yourself until you can comfortably draw the character without really needing to reference those. Although I will tell you, I still struggle a lot with like Sarah's design because she's kind of realistic. So I do have certain rules, like I know how big to make her eyes. Like the irises are a certain size, and if I make her eyes too big or too small, then she just looks wrong. It's not consistent. But for the most part, I also don't really worry too much about staying super consistent with that stuff because I don't think people really expect that. I don't think that's really a reasonable worry. But just as long as it's readable, as long as people understand what you're trying to do, I think it'll be just fine. But yeah, try as hard as you can to keep things consistent and just practice until you got it. All right, I'm just picking colors here that are ones that I don't have in her hand. I don't really like to use browns. I guess I could do a. What color don't I have here? Oh, whatever. Even if it's oh, that one I've got. Maybe something like this. Um, it might be somewhat unrealistic to have these kinds of tones, but you know what? I need to make sure that I also don't have too much of a kind of gaudy variance in the colors because that's its own problem. So sometimes you want things to be realistic, but you also have to remember um, not to do something that's just not going to be pleasing to look at. It's kind of a balancing act to get that just right. One of the nice things about working digitally is the ability to edit out errors. I'm working on layers, so you can see I can't erase this color here because it's on a different layer, but I can erase the colors on the character, or I can erase the colors on the markers because I've kept those separate, which makes it very easy for me to edit later on if I need to. And of course, put things in perspective. You don't want to spend too much time on things like the tone of the markers. But it is just, these are details that people will notice. I still am not set on whether or not she's got an MP3 player because when I did Dream Dreamside is so old that the technology of Sarah's music player it has kind of gotten out of date. Aside for I think it just kind of gave in and just assumed that she would have a cell phone because when I was working on this, the last time I was working on these pages was back in 2015, I would say. And at that time, of course, smartphones were obviously still a big thing in 2015, but there was something about them that bothered me with kids, I think, and I didn't like the idea of Sarah having a cell phone. It bothered me, so I gave her like a separate MP3 device. So I don't know. It's kind of funny when you find yourself worrying about your characters in the same way that parents worry about their kids. Like I don't want her to have a cell phone. She's too young. But of course she's not real. So, but I don't know. I guess I don't really care about the cell phone problem anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and give her a cell phone. I'm going to define it here and now. She's got a cell phone. And I've never really known the rules about showing copywritten stuff or patented designs in stories. That's really unclear to me. And so I don't make it look like a particular brand. Just the general idea that it's a phone. Or maybe it's not. It doesn't really matter. Hey, Christina. Christina's going to be joining us in just a minute. Helena says, I just realized that in 2015 I had just started high school. I feel old. So how do you think that makes me feel? Oh, is this little thing been on here this whole time? Let's see if we can get rid of that. All right. Yes, she would have one. I guess so. I guess she would have one, wouldn't she? Yeah, especially since she's alone in the hospital. I can't really imagine she wouldn't have one. But again, this is one of those things that's evolved over time. When you spend enough time between projects, I'm just fixing a little thing with their eyes that was kind of a mess. Spend enough time between working on something, and the rules change a little bit. At least it's not so old that it was prior to smartphones, so I don't feel so bad. Right? Right? All right. Just a couple of things that I'm noticing I didn't really fill in here. One of the time consuming things with this stuff is where not only do you have to notice these little areas that you've left out, but you need to remember what layer you want to work on with this stuff so that you don't end up with a confusing jumble that's basically impossible to edit. But at the same time, you don't want to spend too much time dealing with the organizational elements so that it just wastes time. You don't want to be wasting time. Something else I think I have to change with her too, actually, is she's not wearing socks. She's wearing slippers because I showed her in another scene where she's wearing slippers. So I've got to mirror that. So actually, I'll just do that right now. See if you can remember what they look like. I think they were just kind of regular, sort of slippery shoes like this. Slippery, not slippery, but slipper-like. All right. That's about right. And those take the place of her socks. So underneath would be her skin tone. So you can see I'm holding this little square icon. This is one of those great things about Procreate. I can just click over where I have the skin tone. It will make that my active color. And that way, I can make sure that I'm using the same colors. Very, very helpful. Very helpful. This is a lot of fun. I've been wanting to do these kinds of live streams or working on Dreamside, but I've had to give up my need for secrecy with this stuff a little bit. So I'm going to be giving away artwork and showing things that might be spoilers. But I think what I've come to accept is that people seem to prefer the idea of being involved in the production rather than me keeping things secretive. And I need to do what I need to do to generate more interest in the project. And if bringing people along for the ride, which is really the most fun way to do this, by the way, it's the most fun if you're here. Banana Meteor. Hi, Dave. Hope you're having a great night. Looks like Christina is joined. And Banana Meteor. That is just a fantastic avatar. What great characters. A chameleon and a bat. How about that? Right, let's see. Can we get Christina on here? Hello? Christina, are you there?
Hey, Dave.
Hey, there you are. I'm going to turn down my music here. All right, let's see. Hey. Christina. Thank you for jumping on. This is great. This will be a lot of fun. And we can talk editing, which I know nothing about. So yeah, let me. Well, why don't you describe a bit more about what you do? That'll be better than me trying to do it.
I do freelance proofreading and copy editing. So, depending on what people ask for, I may just look at like the grammar stuff, or I may do like if a character says something weird, like I may suggest rephrasing it.
Right, and that includes like a variety of services, right? Like of course, you would do full on editing, but you would also do proofreading.
Yeah, like usually like I offer like either or, like just for proofreading is just if you want me to say if there's like typos or something. And then copy editing is like if you want me to actually say like rephrase the sentence or like this person's eye is the wrong color or something like that.
Very cool. Yeah, and I've been greedily reading through Bigfoot Bill 2. So awesome job on that. That's been great.
Thank you.
And yeah. Of course, you worked on that, and yeah, it's wonderful. So really neat to get to talk to people like you, because I don't really I've really gotten to know too many people in that world who work on the editing end of things. So it's a cool process, and the editing is so important because when you're a writer, one of the things that can be a real problem is when you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes when you're putting something down on paper, you think, oh, this is the greatest idea that anyone's ever had. This is going to be the most wonderful writing ever. And then 2 years later, it kind of makes you cringe. And somebody like Christina can get in there and see that ahead of time and have the vision and the foresight to say, your genius idea here isn't quite so genius. Not that I've worked with Christina and we've had this experience, but I have a feeling that's something that she would do.
Yeah, always nice about it though. Always politely say if you could change something.
Yeah. Always polite is good. But at the same time, sometimes you must have had situations where you go up against brick walls with that, and you'll give a piece of advice, and someone will say, "Nah, I'm going to keep it the old way." Has that happened?
Yeah, it's happened a couple of times.
Okay. I see. Yeah, sometimes, when I worked on professional projects before, and I was a little bit more of I guess, a pain in the neck when I was younger. And of course, my way was always right, of course, right? And so I would insist on doing things a certain way. And, there would be people on the team who would disagree with me. And of course, they were wrong, right, Christina? They're 100% wrong because they don't agree with me. And what I started to realize over time is that I began to disagree with my old ideas. So I realized, oh, well, maybe that's me evolving. That's great. But how many of the other people already knew that who were disagreeing with me? And so it's good to have somebody who has the ability to see outside your own head as an author. And of course, the process is also extremely important because you got to make sure that nothing goes to print. Like, so much effort goes into these books, as you can hopefully understand. And you don't want to have something, like a typo that makes it into the final book that'll drive you nuts, because that's the kind of thing that's driving insane. Years down the road, all they would see is that typo.
Yeah, there's been a couple of times where I would point out something and then it wouldn't get changed in the past, so that would still show up in the final book, even though I pointed it out. So now I always do, like, where I ask to go back over it afterwards to make sure we didn't miss anything. Like, I always do that as the final step.
I see. Yeah, Banana Meteor says that Christina is a little loud. Well, Christina, I guess you have to whisper. No, let's see. Is it because I wonder if is it more that I'm quiet? Because it sounds like Christina's at a good level for me.
Yeah, I think your microphone's pretty quiet.
Oh, all right. Let me see if I can adjust that. All right, let's see. Now I'm going to figure out what features I can adjust. I think I can turn the volume up on the mic itself. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how I can adjust this. Well, I guess I'll just talk louder. So
that's probably not me, because my voice is really quiet in real life. So
no, I think yours is fine. No, I think it's just that mine's down pretty low. I'm going to move the mic a little closer to my face. Here, let me pinch this onto my nose. That'll do it. All right. Let me know if that's bad, and if it's too quiet, too loud. There's not too much that I can do about it at this point.
It's a little bit louder than it was before.
Okay. All right. Banana Meteor also says, "Thanks for the avatar love. It's my art, but clearly not Dave level art." Oh, that's come on. First of all, I didn't realize that you were an artist, so that's awesome. And secondly, no, I think it's beautiful. It's great. It's great. It's cool to see the characters take on different art styles, different forms, because obviously I have a way of drawing them that I used in that book, and there are a lot of different ways of approaching the same characters. So it's very cool to see all um, these different approaches to the characters. So it's a real treat to see. It's kind of like when Impossible Layer came out. Christine, I don't know if you've played the ukulele games, but when Impossible Layer, which is the second game, came out, it was really neat to see because here's something that I've been working on, even though I didn't design the characters, but I'd been working with them for so long, and I sort of wrapped things up. Like the book basically shipped, at least went into production right at the time that Impossible Layer came out. So it was kind of neat to sort of immediately see a real production made with the characters that I had been working on for so long.
Yeah,
Um,
that's cool.
yeah, it's kind of neat. It's weird the way the timing of that worked out. I'm coloring markers. I'm coloring drawing tools using my drawing tools.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna get this. I gotta get this like orange marker here, since Diane recommended an orange marker. All right. Whoops! I need to shrink the brush down.
Is my mic still loud? I tried pushing it farther away.
It seems okay. I think yeah, someone said that's better. So
Okay, good.
Okay, no, I think it's fine. I'm gonna be a little louder, and we'll just kind of leave it at that. So I know that you mentioned last time, which I didn't realize it was public information, but what you were working on with the, uh, the 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 new project that you've been on. So do you want to talk a bit about that? Because I'm really curious. Not only how you kind of got set up with that sort of gig, but also just what the experience has been like and some of the challenges that are different from working, say, with an American um, comic artist.
Are you talking about the Kingdom Hearts book?
Yeah. What maybe just some history about that, because I want to know more about that process.
Yeah, so I've been working with Yen Press for a couple years as a freelance proofreader, and I work on another series that's called The Royal Tutor. It's kind of more obscure, but it's kind of like a 1800s period piece that's pretty good. So I ended up working on Kingdom Hearts about a month ago. Like I told them I was interested because I heard they were doing a new manga, and like I liked the video games, so I thought I'd give it a shot and say I was interested, and then they ended up saying, "Sure, you can work on it."
Oh,
So
that's
it
great.
ended up being really cool.
All right, that works out. It's always surprising to me, even though sometimes I hear people say the same thing to me, that how quickly these sort of things can develop, and they don't necessarily have such a complex story of how they got started up. It's kind of like when people would ask, like, "How did you get Platonic to let you work with ukulele?" And it's like, well, I asked them,
Yeah.
and they said yes, and that's pretty much how it went. So yeah, something that I did here on the last stream, I'm doing a little bit as I go here, and sorry, but excuse my artistic confusion here as I jump around the map, because I'm still getting used to talking while I'm working, which is it's something kind of new for me, because it's
That's
usually
cool.
just me held up with my music on and kind of escaping from reality as I just lose myself in the art. So it's a little bit of a challenge for me to do both at the same time, but we'll get better at that, right?
Yeah, you're doing good to me.
Oh, good. Okay. As long as I'm drawing, as long as I'm getting stuff done. And the tricky thing, of course, is can you get things done on schedule? Like if I'm working on the live stream, is it taking me longer to do things that I would be able to do more quickly if I was not on the live stream? So that's been another challenge with the streams, is that I think, well, I got to make sure that it's not going to be something that takes too much effort, too much time, too much attention away, and I'm able to get things done just as quickly as I would normally. So it's a challenge, but I'm not going to complain about it. It's fun. And as long as people keep coming, I'll keep making them. And of course, I haven't been shy about my part of my intentions behind doing these is that one of the biggest challenges, maybe you can offer some insight into this, but one of the biggest challenges that I'm facing with Dreamside is that it is a new IP. It's not licensed like ukulele, so I don't have the benefit of an existing audience. And so when you set forward and you try and do something new like that, you run the risk of just losing the support of people that you have produced content for in the past. And my thought with it was, I had the option to move on to another ukulele project, but I thought this is a project that's been so important to me for so long that I would really like to give it a go and see if it's something that can work. But the trade-off is that whenever you have something new, it's not even so much about will people find it appealing, it's just letting people even find it. Making sure that
Yeah.
people know it exists. That's very, very difficult to do. And so that's the big risk that I'm doing with Dreamside. So part of the thought behind these live streams is to try and generate more of a following as I move closer to doing a crowdfunding campaign, which is not a novel concept, but something that I think is kind of necessary today. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to when like I work with Doug Tenaple on Earthworm Jim and Bigfootville, and kind of what he does is he sort of like tries to like cross pollinate the two fandoms. Like there's already like the people that know about Earthworm Jim, and then there's the Bigfootville fans. And he usually does like on one campaign, like for the Earthworm Jim campaign, the first one, he had like a free preview of the next Bigfoot book. So then those fans knew that Bigfootville existed. But like, I'm not really sure how to do it in this situation since you already did the ukulele book, except like maybe like messaging the backers and saying, hey, I have this other new project that I'm starting up. That's like the only advice I can think of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's pretty much the plan. And it's I think one of the things that I've been a little confused about is without giving anything away, there are some other projects that I've developed that I don't have. I was really a little unsure of what to do next because there are a few options, and the problem is if you have too many options, sometimes you just can't really pick one, and you kind of get stuck. And so I had to just kind of move forward with one of them. I did have there are two gaming related projects that I have in the works.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that both of which have, I'm just going to say, difficulties from a legal perspective. And so the challenge is that they're actually written already. The artwork is not done, but the both projects have completed stories. And I'm very happy with both stories. They're different from ukulele, totally different universes. But both of them are kind of stuck in limbo because of the legal challenges, and the legal challenges make things a real nightmare because you can have everybody. This is the funny thing about how contracts work in this world. You can have everybody involved in agreement and still have projects not move forward because there's a certain language that has to kind of be designed and laid out by lawyers who understand how to set things up so that they are secure from a legal standpoint. And when I say secure, I mean things like if I have a Kickstarter, is there any chance that I could have a legal problem down the road in the middle of production that would prevent me from getting the book made and sent out to backers who have already paid for it. So things like that. These sort of there are a lot of opportunities for that sort of catastrophe situation where
Yeah.
I have to put my reputation on the line by having a Kickstarter, and I can't even begin to say how important it is to make sure that backers are taken care of because I'm still to this day I don't understand how I got any backers. I don't understand the idea of people. I know it happened, but it's amazing to me that people have put that kind of faith in, and they came in, in such numbers with such quantities to support ukulele when it was a project that didn't really exist. I didn't really have a proven track record, and yet people came and supported, and it's still mind blowing to me, and I feel like I owe those people forever. So when it comes to things like taking on those sort of legal risks, if I'm going to say, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to get it to you and I'm going to be in control, which means it's only going to be the highest quality. Everything's going to be the highest quality. I'm going to, make sure the manufacturer is doing the highest possible quality. We're going to do things that surprise you so that when you get the stuff, you feel like you underpaid. Okay. And that's really, really important. If I don't have the ability to control that, and there's some other force that's like a legal force, that might not even be. This is not necessarily that there would be a problem with the specific uh, teams that I would be working with from a licensing perspective, but more maybe the rights are sold off to the characters or something, and suddenly they're owned by Disney, and I've got to, because I'm not going to fight with. Here's the thing: I can't fight with anybody. Like I could have a contract that says, oh, I have the right to do this, but if somebody sends me a cease and desist, it will cost me so much money just to legally defend my right to produce the work in question, that it wouldn't be worth it. It wouldn't be worth it. I would run out of money. So it's funny. You kind of have these contracts, but they're not really. They really don't protect you. So there's a lot of concern with that, and I think one of the things that's moved me a little bit more toward wanting to get Dreamside out is that I have total control over this world, because it's my own creation. Nobody can halt this production. Nobody can say, "All right, I'm withdrawing the rights," or we're selling to Disney. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard of anybody having trouble in that regard, but it's I can't put things in that. I can't put the projects in that sort of risk comfortably. So yeah, but we'll see, and I'll keep moving forward with these and see what comes out of it. But I can tell you that I'm gonna be really careful what I say here. But I've got a very, very cool new concept that involves the video game world in kind of a totally different and really, I'm going to call it a new, fresh way. That's a little different from what I've been proposing in the past. And I'm going to let that develop for a little while before I tell people about it. But I think if you're a fan of games, and especially if you're a fan of classic games and some of the big hitters from history, this would be a project that would be very exciting to you.
Does this have pre-existing characters or original characters?
Both. Yeah, it's something that would have new characters, sort of in a way mingling with old characters. But we'll put it this way: it would not require me to have a lot of legal nonsense set up. So that's as far as I want to describe it at this point. But yeah, I did review the idea with a few people who are, in the industry and kind of are fans of classic games, who got very excited about this idea. And I think it actually would tie in to the audience that supported ukulele. And of course, I get these ideas right when I'm about to kick off something else. So we'll see. But I really want to get Dreamside out there. This story is just fantastic. It's been in my head since 2004. And the overall story, the complete thing is very epic. It's this very long, epic story. That's just it's a really, really big adventure. And I feel like it's like an opus project, that deserves to exist.
So what first made you have the idea to start working on it?
On this project,
On Dreamside?
Yeah, it was actually the first time I had sat down and completed a screenplay, because I used to work in animation, and when I was out of college where I had studied animation, I wanted to develop some stories, that just come up with some ideas and things that I thought would work, as though I had the budget to make an animated film. Just to kind of practice, and I had a lot of creative ideas that just wouldn't stay in my head. So Dreamside was one of them. I actually wrote one before Dreamside, which is actually one of the many future projects that's been revamped. But at the time, it just wasn't working as a story. It was too convoluted, and so I kind of reset my plan a little bit and started from scratch with a different idea, and that was Dreamside, which was primarily based on my experiences. I talked a little bit about this in the last live stream, but it's primarily based on my experiences volunteering at a children's hospital, and it was a neat experience because I had a lot of I would go as an artist. I would draw while I was in school. It was kind of a charity slash practice kind of thing where I could work on the challenge of drawing, sort of with a um, how to put there's some pressure because I had to keep sick kids entertained for a while, and that's actually really challenging to do because the kids weren't exactly excited about being there.
Yeah.
And so that was a challenge to do. But as I said in the last live stream, there was one girl who was there pretty much all the time. So when I would go there week after week, I would see the same kid who would come into the playroom, and I would think, oh man, this has got to be a horrific experience because this child is just essentially permanently housed in this hospital. And so that's kind of what gave me the initial idea is, what would it be like to essentially live in the hospital? And I tried to imagine that somebody in that situation who is particularly imaginative would probably be very creative and would try and figure out a way to take herself out of that world just a little bit, and when she was feeling up to it. So Sarah became that character, and the idea of Dreamside being this fantasy escape in a way is sort of a combination of concepts that I loved as a kid, like the Never-Ending Story. I don't know if you're familiar with that one,
I've
but
heard
that,
of it, but I haven't watched it.
yeah, oh, it's a classic, and the book was an absolute. I mean, it's that with Alice in Wonderland collectively would definitely comprise my favorite childhood books, and there's a lot of influence with the Neverending Story and Alice in here. And the idea sort of this fantasy character, which actually originally was not like the Dream Girl. It was kind of this almost gesture like clownish character that was a little hyper real that would appear outside the window because it was kind of frightening actually how I originally designed it. But the idea was that this character would see this fantastical character outside her window that would be floating in the air, and would take her away to this fantasy world, and very much like Peter Pan. And so I describe it as kind of being like the Never-Ending Story or Peter Pan with a medical theme, because she's kind of going back and forth between the fantasy world and um, the hospital itself. And there's a third realm, which is the nightmare world, which is where she goes when she has nightmares.
Mm.
Um, and that's kind of that comes up in chapter 3, which I will be showing off in the near future. But that actually, it's kind of neat because I'm using a slightly different art style for that. There's a little bit of dissonance in the art styles between the chapters because the actual artistic approach to the artwork is sort of itself a kind of a metaphysical concept with a story. It's sort of the art, the way that I'm drawing using the actual style that I'm using, like heavy line art or light line art, or the amount of color, the amount of black and white, the amount of contrast. All of these things are used artistically to represent certain states of mind in the story. And chapter 3, which is a nightmare scene, kind of the first nightmare scene where she encounters the monster that she sees in her nightmares, which is this giant beast that she calls the Gray Dragon is uses more of a rendered art style with a little bit less line, and the idea there is to create a bit more of a disquieting um, universe where the lines don't really connect because there aren't that many lines, so the shapes are a little looser, and it kind of suggests a loss of a grasp on reality and control over her herself, her mind, because that's really kind of what that's one of the major trauma aspects of Dreamside is that Sarah is out of control of herself because being in the hospital, she constantly has all of this manipulation of herself physically. Where she has, like, for example, I don't know if you know what a PICC line is, but it's essentially a portable IV,
Mm.
um, so that you can, for kids it's great because they don't have to remain connected to an IV pole if that they have to cart around. They can use this thing called a PICC line, which is like a little portable thing, and so if you need to have some sort of a basically they don't have to keep getting stuck over and over with an IV, and so you can just kind of keep this PICC line in. But then when they don't need to be connected to the IV pole itself and have any sort of actual medicine or the saline solution or whatever it is that is being given to them, they can disconnect and they basically can have a little cap sort of put on this PICC line, and you sort of forget that it's there. And that way kids can move about when they're in the hospital and they're not kind of locked down. But that PICC line and just all of the medicines and everything that are very invasive represent kind of a loss of control over her autonomy as a character, and so that's something that comes up a little sort of as a psychological component during the nightmare sequences.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes any sense. But let's see. Dragmundus says, I've read the manga of Kingdom Hearts 1. Nice.
Yeah, I think it was Kingdom Hearts 2. I remember reading the manga back in high school, and it's like I never imagined I'd actually be working on it now. It's pretty cool.
Oh, that's very cool. So this is something. So you had read the original one, and now you're working on the second one.
Yeah, I don't think I read the first Kingdom Hearts manga, but I read like the one based on Kingdom Hearts 2 that had like Roxas and all them in it.
Right. Right. Banana Meteor says, I bet the canon designs of the duo, talking about Ukulele now, feel a little strange to you now that you've really made them your own. Well, they do. Yeah, they do and they don't. It's funny because, I love the actual designs, the game designs. I've talked a little bit about some of the changes that I made and why I made them. And for the most part, it's just kind of adapting to my own style, but also it's also adapting to the needs of a comic, which are a little bit different from the game. And there's some. I knew that with Yuka, I wanted to play around a bit with the posing and stretch things a little bit. It's definitely a bit more cartoony than the game, because I wanted to have some really wacky poses, especially with characters like Dr. Quack, who are maniacal in the book, and Dr. Quack is a lot more. You don't see a lot of cartoony, exaggerative poses in the game. So to kind of make sure I get the kind of readability that I need on a graphic image that's flattened instead of seeing it moving in 3D, I changed the character designs a little bit to kind of increase their, how to put it, their kind of their graphic clarity in 2D. So some of those changes have to be made, but it doesn't mean that I dislike or that I ever did dislike the game designs. It's just that I just changed them a little bit because I thought that would make sense for the book itself.
Yeah. So you mentioned you worked in animation before. What kind of shows or movies did you work on in the past?
I mostly worked. There were two industries I would say where I worked in animation. The first was actually in toys, and that was when I was at Fisher Price, which I worked on and off at Fisher Price for years, and before I went to Insomniac Games, which is the game studio I worked at for the majority of, like, that's the longest single time that I worked was for Insomniac, where I worked on games. So most of my animation work has been in gaming, actually. Um, and on titles like Ratchet and Clank, Resistance, Sunset Overdrive, I think. And I worked on a title called Slow Down Bowl, which was actually after I left, it was something I did on a contract basis, but mostly gaming related animation.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a fun world, but animation is frustrating to me a little bit because it's so incredibly time consuming. And one of the things about animation that I would say one of the things that I've kind of had to accept over the years is you need to kind of prioritize like what's important to you as an artist, and you can focus a little bit more specifically on kind of the best direction for you, and sometimes that means a total change of medium. And I dropped animation at least temporarily because what's more important to me than making animations was telling stories.
Yeah.
And that was the medium that I used, but it wasn't practical for doing that. It was too time consuming, it was too expensive, and usually I needed help. And animation is usually not something that one person does. They can, but there are always limitations. You might have to pick a simpler style or something that will be easier to produce if you do it by yourself. And if you have a team, well, then you have a different kind of problem, whereas now if you work with a team, you've got to kind of do what the team wants to do. And if you are trying to make your own particular work, artistic project, it's not that it's better than a team effort. It's just that you want to make this thing that doesn't exist. And that's something that might have to be a solitary experience. It's kind of like, people never question, if you look at like a painting, right? People don't question, how many artists worked on this painting. The expectation from the start actually is that there's a single artist, and usually it's something that if there were multiple artists who worked on a single painting, that's usually the surprising information, right? It's like, oh, a couple of artists worked on this painting,
Yeah.
which is, in some way is highly impractical, because you imagine, what do they do? Pass the canvas back and forth between each other? But it's a thing, that multiple people work on paintings. But for me, I think of these individual projects as being like paintings. They just happen to use a different medium, whether it's a book or a movie or a game. There are ideas that are in my head, as all artists have, that I want to kind of be exactly what they are in my head on paper. And I might need to do that alone. And that just means that I have to spend a bit more time on it. And it's going to take a while. It's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to actually want to work in animation as a writer, like when I first started college.
Oh,
but then
cool.
it was kind of like you said about like people like changing my ideas and stuff. I didn't really like the sound of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Plus, like having to move to California and all that didn't sound like fun. So like I ended up taking, like I still did like creative writing classes and stuff, but then I ended up taking an editing class, and then I found out that I really enjoyed working on other people's stuff more than my own stuff because it wasn't so stressful. But like I still kind of had like a say in how the story turned out, which was still cool.
That is really neat, and it's almost kind of the opposite of what my approach was. And it's strange too, because I've come around to a bit more in your way of thinking since then, because when I left Insomniac, one of the core reasons for doing that, as I just described, is wanting to develop my own thing. I thought, if I have these ideas, I really want to get them out there. And as cool as it is to work on stuff like Ratchet and Clank, I feel like I'd be happier if I made my own stuff. But the funny thing is, the first book I ended up publishing was somebody else's work.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the way it works. And what I realized is it was never really true. What I learned is it's not really true that I needed to work on my own ideas. What I learned is much more specific. It's that the way I like to work is I like to be in control of the production I'm working on, but they don't have to be my characters. It doesn't have to be my world. I kind of just want to develop something that I have control over, and that I don't have to have too many compromise conversations. And again, it's not saying that I know the answers. It's not that there's some sort of a claim that I'll have a better vision of how to do something than somebody else. It's not that at all. It's more that whenever you have a sort of a compromise, right, which happens all the time in creative development, where someone will say, I want to go in this direction, you want to go in a different direction, and you kind of settle somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Compromise is kind of the worst thing ever when it
Hmm.
comes to art, because it's kind of just 50% of anything. And it's almost like I would prefer to go with the idea that I disagreed with 100% than compromise and do half of either. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of what I realized over time, is that if it can't be a well, I'll give you an example of an industry figure who is kind of in control for better or worse, right? And I think he fully acknowledges the worse. Would be somebody, and I'm not comparing myself, but I do want to just bring this person up, is somebody like Hayao Miyazaki, because Miyazaki is somebody who designs kind of the totality of a project. He goes through and he storyboards the whole movie. He's in control of what the animators are doing, and there's a lot of personal vision that you can see that's in that work. He's definitely the auteur of the project, right?
Hmm.
And the problem with that, of course, is not a lot of people are balancing his ideas. So he might go off on a 20-minute tangent in a movie that somebody, say, for example, like yourself, Christina, would have the foresight to say, you know, maybe don't do this incredibly long tangent that goes off with the character wandering into a forest and just walking around. And to
Yeah.
Miyazaki, it might be this brilliant, wonderful idea that doesn't necessarily resonate with an audience. And so, what I really love is the idea of working in solitude in tandem with other people, which is why I love these live streams and I want to do more of them. Uh, is we're all working alone together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Everyone's kind of working on their own vision, which is very exciting. But we can get together like this. We don't have to be so isolated and lonely. While during development, we can be encouraging to each other, but everyone's still kind of working on their own thing. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Hmm.
Let me describe a little bit what I'm doing in this process right now. I'm adding these highlights, right? These highlights are really where things kind of come to life, and you add a lot of texture to things. Because, like, for example, she's wearing headphones, and the headphones have plastic components, right? So plastic has a different texture than her hair, and hair has a different texture than skin, and skin has a different texture than clothing. So, for example, if I put on a bright highlight on her clothing, it doesn't look right, because it
Yeah.
kind of looks like it's plastic. Because on plastic, you will get these like bright little highlights like that, right? And so, or on metal, things like that. So these bright highlights are really key to establishing what things have what surfaces. So like the skin around the eyes is always a little bit more. You're going to see a little bit more of a highlight on that, because the skin itself is a bit smoother, and it has you're going to see a little bit more of a light bounce off of that. You get oil glands and things like that, really nasty stuff that gives the skin the texture that it has. But you got to be really careful with the stuff that you don't end up going overboard if you're going for a more realistic look, because before you know it, you can end up making a character look like they're wearing like crazy makeup or something like that doesn't really fit. But at the same time, it's like, well, you're also making a stylized uh, look for the character, and so you're trying to kind of find a balance between those. And let me tell you, that is kind of challenging to do.
Yeah. Back when I used to draw a lot, like I try to do it sometimes, but not as often. But I was really bad at doing like the rendering and highlighting and shading and all that. Like everything would look kind of flat, and then like I try to do the shadows and stuff, and it would look weird. So
Oh,
it's
it's
really
just
cool to hear you explain how to do it.
no, it's you know what, and the same thing. It's just a matter of the time. That's all it is. You know what I mean. Things like this, like the lip, you got to be really careful with the lips, because you can make them look like they're wearing lip gloss. So, for example, one thing I like to do is I put the highlight in, because there would be a little bit of one, but then I blend it out a bit so that it softens and it becomes a little bit more. It just keeps it from looking like there's lipstick on the character. You know what I mean? Because the
Yeah.
character would not be wearing lipstick in this scene. But at the same time, there are sort of stylistic approaches. Like I do use these heavily amplified eyelashes on the characters, and part of that actually has to do with making sure that the eyes are very readable at different sizes and they really command your attention. So when you look at these pages and you open up the book and you get to a page, I want your eyes to snap to the character's eyes as quickly as possible. And one of the ways to ensure that you can do that is to have a heavy amount of contrast and using these kind of black eyelashes. That's another thing too, is if she has this very pale hair color, her eyelashes would not be black. However, by using the black color in juxtaposition with a very pale skin, it snaps your eyes, whether you like it or not, to hers,
Yeah.
and that's going to create a little bit of you're going to identify a little bit more with her with that. Let me see what people are saying here. Meteor says, I said it before, but it's press enough with your ukulele art that'll follow any IP. All right. Well, Christina, I've got one person. one person at least is going to support Dreamside. So good. There we go. We're on our way. It really just takes one to start with.
Yeah.
And then she also says, come back to that second Yuka project later, though. Yeah. Well, without giving anything away, I also wrote another Yuka project. So I do have one, and it is very funny. Very funny, and we'll put it this way: is I wrote a story that's for Laylee, and I really want to work with that because the first book is focused on Yuka, and I have I wanted to make Yuka is definitely the protagonist of the first story. It's really about him because he does an awful lot of he has an awful lot of growth throughout the story, and the challenge that made Yuka interesting for me was figuring out how you can tell a story about a character who's like a Mario or a Link, who are designed to be flawless heroes.
Yeah.
They don't really have any flaws because they're designed to not have any flaws. They're designed to be these perfect avatars that the player can project themselves onto. But if you're going to tell a story about a character who's just a perfect hero, it doesn't really work because you don't have that contrast that's needed, where you see the character take a series of actions that will create contrast throughout the story. You really need to have that. So how do you tell a story about Yuka? And Yuka is he's flawed in a distinct way, but I couldn't turn him into a jerk. There are things I can't. There's certain things I can't do with Yuka without really damaging the character himself. So I had to think very hard about how to add flaws to Yuka's character, and what I came up with is that he's such a hero that he insists on doing everything alone, and he won't let anybody else get involved in saving the day, so to speak. And so he doesn't really take advice from people, or he doesn't take assistance. And what that also means is that he's disrespectful to Laylee, because Laylee's his other half, his other kind of hero half, and Laylee is always giving him advice and her thoughts on what he should be doing. And he kind of just blows it off, and he's going to do what he's going to do because it's his job to save the day. Now he'll be friendly about it, but he's going to take he's going to take his direction just the way it is. And that ends up really, really hurting him in a powerful way, if you've read the book, without spoiling anything. But he makes a critically bad decision that results in him basically getting separated from Laylee. And Laylee is a key element to him being able to accomplish the goal. So the irony of the whole irony of the story is that if he had, by ignoring Laylee's advice, trying to save the day, he can no longer save the day because she's necessary for him to be able to accomplish his goal. So having that kind of character dynamic is a lot of fun. So that the first book is really very much about Yuka, and the second one is that I had in mind has more to do with Laylee. And if I've got a piece of art I made for it that is, it's in a different art style, and all you need to know about the story is in this one image. it's just perfect. I really want to show it off, but at the same time, I feel like I should keep it under wraps. I probably shouldn't even be talking about it right now, but that's something that I would love to do in the future. So yes, good idea. I will come back to it in the future.
So are your
Uh,
books kind of like sequels to the games? Like, should you have played the games before you read the books?
Not exactly. It's what I say is they're more rewarding for people who played the games because there's a lot of tie-in material, but they're also rewarding for people who are playing. They're coming from years of experiencing the history of games that inspired ukulele. So if you've kind of been there for that whole back catalog of rare games like Donkey Kong Country, Banjo Kazooie, Jet Force Gemini, and then you kind of mix it with my own love for classic adventure films like The Dark Crystal or The Goonies and stuff like that, then you're gonna get a lot out of ukulele. But in terms of the book itself, one of the things that's been very important to me about any book that I work on is that it does stand alone, and so that it can kind of become a standalone project, so that years from now, if people are not playing the game, it's still something that it would be enjoyable to read on its own, and you don't really have to know these characters um, from the games in order to enjoy the books.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't played the games yet, but I would like to read the books at least.
Yeah, yes. Well, the games are great, and like I said, if you like those other kind of classics that I mentioned, Yuka is designed specifically to appeal to that.
Yeah, I grew up with Donkey Kong Country. That was one of my favorites.
Donkey Kong Country is actually secretly the biggest influence on Cracklestone, because the Donkey Kong Country games, getting a little bit beyond the sort of character focused aspect of the story, is that I wanted to have a reference to the sort of hyper challenge worlds that you would get with games like Donkey Kong Country, because when you would beat Donkey Kong Country, if you accomplish certain tasks, it would open up a secret like challenging world that was extremely hard, and I thought it would be kind of fun to have a tongue-in-cheek reference to that in the Cracklestone tome, because I wanted to make it be like a very challenging world, so that it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek reference to the idea that if you play the game, when you finish the game, you would unlock the challenge world, and the book is kind of like that. So it's one of those ways that people who play the game, I think, would get a little bit extra enjoyment out of the book, especially if they play Donkey Kong Countries. Because yeah, those are classics, really great classics. I can use this highlight a little bit to kind of. I'm also kind of using it a little bit to do a paint over here and there. I really have to be extremely careful with it though, because um, you don't want to. First of all, you don't want to commit to doing something that it's like every single step that I take with this art is something that I'm committing to doing to about 400 illustrations. Because Dreamside has an insane amount of illustrations. I mean, book one is going to be around a 100-page book, and there's 6 of them in total. And I've got an average of, I would say, 2 illustrations per spread, so about 1 per page or so. So actually, yeah, I guess we're looking at almost 500 to 600 illustrations in total for the entire series. So it's going to be time consuming. So in order to ensure consistency, I've got to make sure that I don't do things that are going to be. I remember hearing Jim Davis talk about Garfield, and the reason he did stripes on Garfield. And I think when he originally submitted the idea for Garfield, an editor or something had looked at the Garfield design and said, "Why don't you give him some stripes? It'll make him, it'll help the character stand out a bit." And Jim Davis said that was a brilliant idea. He went back and added stripes to Garfield, and because of that, he said that he had drawn something like a million. He had drawn all of these stripes throughout all the years with Garfield just because of that one stupid suggestion. uh, so it's like you got to think exponentially with this stuff. Like, what's it going to cost me in the future if I do this thing now?
So is Dreamside going to be more kind of like prose, like just have like regular sentences at the bottom, or is it going to have like word balloons like a comic too?
It's going to be both, actually, because I'm doing a bit of a mix. If you're familiar with, well, did you work with Jason Brubaker?
Yeah, I worked on the last two Cithra books as a
Oh, well,
proofreader.
I was about to say it's kind of like Sithra if you've heard of that book, but then I'm like, oh, you've worked on that book. But yeah, it's kind of a hybrid. It's definitely more prose than Word Bubble. It's got a little bit more of a classic illustrated book feel. I mean, I just have temporary text that I put in here so you can see kind of where the text placement is, for example. Although this has
Yeah.
to be edited, and the text will be organically integrated with different size, words that are more hand drawn. So it kind of integrates with the illustrations a lot. But that's the last step I'm doing, and then I'll have the occasional word bubble. But one of the things that I love so much about Cithra is Jason figured out how to integrate the word bubbles in a way that is very easy to read, because he'll mix them into the prose sections and he'll draw a line, from the bubble to the image. So you're reading the bubble as part of the image, but you're kind of it's kind of still part of the prose. And I know that he varies around and does some more traditional comic style pages, which keeps it all very fresh, um, and that's great. But with Dreamside, I'm definitely going a little heavier on the prose. Um, it was originally going to be a comic. Once I converted it to a book, it was going to be a full on comic. But Dreamside benefits from having these big, lush illustrations. And I knew that if I was going to detail the art to the level that I wanted, I would need to do fewer of them per page. And the problem with the comic format is, if, with comics, you generally are keeping the text somewhat brief. And I just did not, people would whip through the book. So it would take me forever to draw these pictures that people would be looking at for like 10 seconds a page.
Yeah.
And so it just didn't make sense to me. I needed something that would keep people locked onto the page a little bit longer. And even if you were to read the comic and say, okay, I'm done reading, but I'm going to stare at the art for a little bit more because it's very highly detailed, it's still it's kind of an artificial process with that. And I just want to make sure that I'm using a couple of tricks to just slow people down a little bit and let them focus on the page. And that might be a bad move, but there's certainly people who will think it's a little bit on the slow side, or maybe a little bit, I don't want to use the word boring, but I guess in a way, I've got to watch out to make sure it's not boring. But I think by doing enough surprise with the illustrations, I think it'll ensure that every time you turn the page, you just don't know what you're going to see. And it doesn't matter what element of the book, what part of the book you're in, it's always going to be a surprise with the art. So we'll see what people think about that. So yes, Banana Meteor. I cannot
Yeah.
talk about the other IP at this point, because because I gave my promise to not talk about him. So unfortunately, I can't do that. Yeah. Then says, no wonder you're pursuing Yuka toys now. Is there any specific Insomniac scenes I should know are yours? With Insomniac, I worked on the 5 Ratchet and Clank games that were on the PS3, except for Quest for Booty. That one I did not work on. So I worked on the other 5. So if it's a PS3 Ratchet, if it's a cutscene that is not a what we call designer cutscene, which means that there are some cutscenes that were more cinematic that kind of needed more animator involvement, and there were some that were more procedurally developed that the designer might set up. I worked on the ones that are more cinematic in nature. So if there's more camera movement and effects and things like that, you can assume that I worked on it. Probably my favorite stuff that I worked on were all the Dr. Nefarious cutscenes, because that character is just over the top, and crazy and fun. And we kept trying to figure out ways to have Dr. Nefarious go even more over the top. There was a one of my best buddies, and was the animator at Insomniac, actually, who had originally encouraged me to apply when they needed a temp artist. He's a phenomenal animator. He was the animator on Ratchet and Clank 3 on the PS2, which is the first time that we see Dr. Nefarious. And that character, I remember him doing a cutscene where he would shout. He's so over the top. He's so extreme. He would scream so loud that it would snap the synapses in his mind, and it's like the computer crash because he's a machine basically, and so he would freeze, and the running joke is that every time that happens to him, a speaker on him starts playing it like picks up reception of a space soap opera. It was classic. It's just absolutely classic where he would be screaming, he'd shout, and then he would freeze in place, sparks would shoot out, and you would just start hearing these this cheesy romantic dialogue from this space soap opera that for some reason he had always picked up through his reception.
Yeah.
So that was a running joke, and my buddy had done such a great animation where he would shout. There was a trigger for him where there's one character he hates so much. It's Captain Quark, and he would when he even thinking about Quark enraged him so much that would generally trigger that breakdown. And I remember with Ratchet and Clank Future 2, that was kind of the return of Dr. Nefarious, and I remember working pretty diligently with the animator who was assigned to Dr. Nefarious, or at least did most of his scenes, to just try and go over the top even more than Ratchet and Clank 3, to just see how we could push things as far as possible with him. And that was...
You're talking about A Crack in Time? Is that what you're talking about?
Time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that one was my favorite.
Yeah, that was the one that I actually had the most involvement on. And we started. I'm going to say that was actually the first project that I did as a full-time employee, because prior to that I was a temp, and prior to that I was a contract artist. So Ratchet and Clank Future 2, yeah, Crack in Time was the first one that I was full-time on. It was a fun project, and Crack in Time. I mean, it was so ambitious. The writer for it was really just so excited to make that project what it was, and he had written all this wonderful stuff, and there were a lot of things that we ended up having to cut from the game because there was just so much extra material, and I know that was sort of heartbreaking for him at a certain point in time, but I think we got the majority of the good stuff in there. We tried as hard as possible to get everything integrated.
Yeah, the story in that one was my favorite, definitely, out of the series.
Right, with what was it, Alistair Azimuth? Yeah, the other Lombax. And now it looks like we've got in the new Ratchet, looks like we've got another Lombax showing up. So we're gonna learn more about that, I guess. Let's see. Let's see. Helena says, "Hey, I've been here for 5 years. I'd also like my support to be acknowledged." That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. You've been very patient. Very patient. Yes. And I'm sorry that Dreamside has kind of had to fall into the back burner a little bit, so that I could get Yuka made. First of all, Yuka was not originally intended to be such a long development. It was something that was actually, it was kind of like a quick sprightly project I was going to move on to. And as it turns out, it took a very long time to do. It took pretty much as long as Dreamside. So there's an irony there, but that's just kind of the way it goes. My thought originally was that Dreamside would benefit from being able to find people who are into other projects and see if I can kind of harness the interest from other fan bases. And Yuka just was kind of the most sensible and available opportunity for me. And so that's just kind of the way that went. You make decisions and you live with them. So we'll see if that was a smart decision or not. I still don't really know. But yes. But anyway, we're gonna try and make Dreamside work, and if we're lucky, that will be the case. So yeah, I just turned on a layer here that is for these buildings in the back. I actually, in the original pass on this, I had a pretty detailed rendering of the city, which I just obliterated. This was one of those things I spent quite a bit of time on too, rendering out the city, but it was just too attention grabbing from what I really wanted us to focus on, which is Sarah drawing. So I have this grand city, and then I've got little girl drawing in pad, and I thought, yeah, the little girl drawing the pad is much more important.
That's
so
true.
I had to get rid of the city but I didn't want to completely get rid of it. So I've been working with this kind of vignette style where things fade out. Part of this is where you, uh, I like trying to turn challenges into positives. And in the case of Dreamside, one of the things that was just a real nightmare for me is that I was doing these extremely detailed illustrations that were taking way too long. And what I realized is all the detail was kind of just taken away from what was very important. And I found that if I did focus a little bit on the illustrations, not only did it increase the appeal and the readability of the story, but it also it helped me come up with this what I think is a very attractive vignette style, which is kind of something that I've always wanted to work with, where you get this fade out to white. And so I tried applying this fade to white with some of the background elements, and we'll see how this actually ends up working. So I'm actually going to work on that right now. I've got to trace these buildings in the background and make a few more layers of what's going on back here. So I'll make a new layer for that, and then I'm going to use a really off color here just because I need to see what I'm doing clearly here. And the fastest way to do this actually is to use you kind of do an outline around it like this. And you can use tools like the straight line tool. This happens to be a straight line tool where I will draw and then hold in, and it will convert my the line that I just made into a straight line. I'm going to go a little bit beyond the into the background behind the elements that I've already drawn because I want to get a little bit of overlap. So I'll do this, just make a little outline here. And once I have the outline, I can do a fill. Just making sure that I have it as a reference layer. And I'll drag a color. So there, I've got that building filled in. And then I can begin to color temp it. So I want to do this on a layered basis. I think what I want to do is the buildings in the back, I want to have them move toward this white tone, which is not exactly white. So I'm going to turn off these other color temping layers so I can just see what the actual color is there in the background. And then I can trace these other layers. I think I'm just going to go one more layer. I think the ones in the background behind here. Oh, and you run into the iPad dilemma, which is that I can't make any more layers. So I have to find ways to, reduce my layer complexity. I actually have a paper texture layer that I can add later. So I'll just delete this, but that's what it looks like, by the way. It adds a paper tone, kind of a canvas texture, but I don't actually need that while I'm working. So let's get rid of that, and I've freed up room for another layer. I kind of like this puzzle challenge of working with layer limitations because it forces me to keep things sprightly and not get too confused.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it'll just be a mess and I'll have 100 layers, which is a huge problem with the original Dreamside art. And one of the reasons that I went through this process of simplification for the art is really just to make things readable. Because I went back to try and edit the art that I made years ago, and I can't even remember what I was thinking with some of the layers because they were so messy. And the worst part is, and you can understand this, Christina, because if you've ever spent any time doing digital art, is one of the most sensible things you can do is keep things like your shadows on a separate layer, right? Because that way you can make color changes as needed to one layer, and then you adjust your shadows on another layer, and that way you're not screwing up your color. You can keep them separate. Right, so you can do these operations on separate layers. Well, I kept all of these separate layers, kind of except the ones that were really important to keep. Like I had merged the color and the shadow together, which is just a terrible idea. So live and learn, live and learn. All right, that I actually did not close off properly. I can actually isolate this layer by holding in on the question mark, And so I can examine it and see, because I'm trying to make a solid line that doesn't have any gaps. Because that allows me to do a fill. Oh, I know why it's doing it. It's because I have another layer as the reference. If this doesn't make any sense, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I've only done like a tiny bit of digital art. Like I have the Clip Studio Paint program.
Yeah, it's a great software.
I haven't used it a whole lot, but like I pretty much just drew like my avatar with it and then a couple other things and haven't used it in a while.
Yeah, as needed, and I just use whatever software makes sense for the task at hand. If I used to use Clip Studio a little more than I do these days. There are times when I'm using it that I think there are times when I have to do a task that are still they're still more easily done with Clip Studio, and so I'll switch over to that. Procreate does some things wonderfully. I mean, it's great how sketchy and just open the software is to making kind of just quick drawings, and you don't really have to think too much about the technicalities. And Photoshop is a very it's a beastly software. It has just so much stuff to it. And the problem with that is it can be very taxing on your computer. And so, it just doesn't run as nicely as Procreate does on the iPad. So, interestingly, I get better performance on Procreate on an iPad than I do Photoshop on a powerful computer, because Procreate is designed very specifically for this particular usage, for this particular device. So, better to use a software on a lower power device that's made for that device than the other way around. All right, now I got to pick colors for these layers here. So I think, I guess I want to go dark to light, but I don't know. I'm just going to experiment here. Let's see what we do. I'm going to go white for the farthest layer. And I'm going to go just a little bit darker as we go. I'm still going to stay pretty light. Yes, this is a trial and error process. So you let me know what you like, because I have no idea. It's not going to work.
I think the lighter colors would look better because, like you said, you were trying to keep the focus on the girl in the foreground and not on the buildings.
Yeah.
If they're too dark, it would kind of like make you look at them instead.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I'm just trying to decide if I want to go full white with them, like just make an actual silhouette for all of them, because I can do that as well. That might actually work best. Now I have to turn on all my layers again. It's funny because if you go full white, it looks a little unfinished. I think that I want to have a little bit of tone. Yeah, I'm going to do a little bit of tone. I've got this colored pencil hatch brush that I made, which you can see here is just a bunch of hatch lines, because I was going in and doing these hatching processes for the background, and they were taking forever because hatching takes forever. And I realized I could just make a brush that is just a bunch of hatch lines at once.
Yeah.
Amazing things you can do digitally. Let's see what happens if I just give these buildings a little bit of an edging, just to keep them dreamy, kind of faded into the background. This is one of those things that you see when it's done, and people will react to it when I finally get it working, and they'll say, that's when I hear the nice compliments. They'll say, "Oh wow, how did you figure that out?" And I say, "Through ridiculous amount of trial and error." But it was not a visionary thing. Trust me. It's just trying stuff until it works. That's all it is. That's why I always tell people that this seems like one of those ridiculous platitudes that people will say, is don't give up and you can do it. And but the reason that I say that it's not just to be encouraging. It's really you need to know how ridiculously ignorant I am with this stuff. Like it's just trying stuff out until it works. It's not there's not some secret, you know, mad scientist process here or magic at work. It's me just noodling back and forth until I think it works. So if I can do that, anybody can do it. I mean, once you get to know the tools, I don't think anybody is just out of luck with this. Like, there's just no way that you could ever do it. You know what I mean? Christina does not agree with me.
I'm sorry, I had to mute my mic because my dogs were barking.
Oh, what kind of dogs do you have?
They're like half lab and half like some kind of hound dog. They're kind of like
some kind of hound dog. Nice.
There's one that's like black and white and one that's brown and white.
We had dogs growing up. Since then, no dogs. I do like dogs, though. I don't know that you could really dislike dogs.
I have a couple of cats, too. They're all outside. I live like out in the country, so they all just kind of run around in the backyard.
Oh, that's fun. Well, I'm sure they love that. If I were a cat, I would want to run around in the backyard, I think. I'm making a selection here to eliminate the area where I've overpainted for the background here. There are probably smarter ways of doing this, but this way works, and so that's good enough for me. I'm sure you found that to be the case, where there's that there's a thing you're doing. There's inevitably a better way, but it's like, if I take the time to figure out the better way, I'll waste more time than just doing it the dumb way.
Yeah.
So I just stick with the dumb way sometimes. If I have a dumb way that works, then that's good. That's good enough for me. I was fighting back and forth between keeping the line for the buildings, but with like a very light tone. I can't tell if I like that or not. I don't think I like it.
Yeah, I kind of like the more simplified one better.
Yeah, I think so. Because it makes it just a background element it's unimportant, really. Like, I need you to know she's in the city, but other than that, it's just not important what's going on with the buildings. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. Okay, cool. I meant to fill that in, so we're making progress here, Christina. Making progress. I'm gonna get back to the highlighting here. So you can see this is kind of like, you can see what the highlighting does to the character in terms of adding a bit of texture to things. It's pretty substantial. All right, I'll put that on the markers too. Whoops, wrong brush. I've got some Xenoblade music on in the background. You ever played those games?
No, I haven't.
They are kind of confusing, but they're neat. Very ambitious titles. They have these huge, expansive worlds, really, really, really big worlds. Kind of maybe a little too big, but they're very cool. I like it when games can just sort of do the impossible like that. make a world that big somehow. It seems like something that in the past would just have been so impossible. Somehow they manage it. They manage it. They make it make sense, and somehow it's navigatable. And it's pretty cool, and it has great music. The composer is the same composer from the Chrono Trigger days back on the Super Nintendo,
Cool.
or at least the lead composer. I guess I don't really know how much he did.
Yeah, I'm playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, and the world's not very big in that one because it's just in Midgar.
That I started playing that recently too, and I can't decide what I think about it yet because
Yeah, it's kind of like it feels like it tries too hard to be edgy sometimes.
it it does have that kind of hot topic feel, but I think maybe it's what's bugging me a little bit about it. I was talking to a buddy of mine recently about um, one of the things that made old school JRPGs work for me is that they presented a certain amount of fantasy to you, that there are certain things that they presented and made rules, and then there are things that they kind of let go. So they would be up to the player to imagine. And one of the things about Final Fantasy VII is that you had these on the original PlayStation is you had these characters who were very they were very low fidelity. You couldn't really make out what Cloud looked like. Um, I mean, you kind of could, but it was a very simplified little sprite. Well, it wasn't a sprite in that game, but the characters were not very descriptive, but they were made up in dialogue, and you didn't hear their voices. You read their voices, and that meant that you had to use your imagination a bit to decide what the characters were going to be like. And one of the kind of weird uncanny valley problems that come with these HD remakes is that you have people playing the game who played the originals, and they kind of have an idea of how everything is supposed to feel and sound, and how the characters act and behave, and what their voices sounded like in your head. And if that doesn't mesh with what's on screen, it's not that it's a bad experience; it's that it's a disjointed, disquieting experience for me. Um, because it's sort of like, wait a minute, I defined who Cloud was in my head, and he doesn't sound like this. And he doesn't have these kinds of facial expressions. That's not Cloud. And then I'm thinking, well, that is Cloud. It's just it was never my Cloud. And so I think that it's both very interesting and also there's something uncomfortable about the experience, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then I realized it's because it's kind of tearing up my own memory of what this game was. And I don't find that to be a very enjoyable experience. I think that might be what's going on. Although it's incredible. I mean, it's an incredible experience. I mean, that there's so it's so brilliant to look at, and that it's overwhelming. Also, you can tell there's just so much effort put into it to make it what it is. All the same, it's kind of ironic because the more description is put in there, the more it kind of takes away for me in a way. One of the nice things about books is just that, is that there are certain elements that are left to the reader's imagination. Like, I can make this character sit here and be drawing in this tablet, or sketchbook, but it's up to the reader to hear her voice. It's up to the reader to make her move, to get a sense of what the environment is like, the atmosphere. That's indicated in the art, but it's not commanded to the reader. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I played the original PS1 game a few years ago, so it wasn't really like a childhood memory kind of thing. So I guess I wasn't as picky about that part of it. But I guess kind of where they tried to do the splitting into multiple games thing, where they made the entire 40-hour game in one city. I'm not really sure how I feel about that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of more interesting than I thought it would be. it has more like parts of the city that are kind of different from each other, but I still kind of like the more like naturey going to villages kind of parts of the game better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I haven't actually gotten that far into it. And I think that maybe it's, but that's interesting because in the original game, they, I think they were, I think you were fairly limited in terms of where you went into the pre, uh, main world parts of the game when you were kind of stuck in the main, what is it? Midgar. That's it. When you were stuck in there, everything was very dark and very technological. And I think that I don't remember them having any daytime scenes actually in the original game. And I think I remember being a bit surprised when I saw the sun come out in the remake. Because I don't know if I'm wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it stayed nighttime. Or it's just that they were under the the roof mechanism.
Yeah, I'm usually not a fan of like the dark, gritty stuff. So it's like the whole game is trying to be like that, or at least the whole first part of the game is. So
Yeah.
like when they come out with part two, I'll probably like that better.
Right, yeah, and that was one of my favorite aspects of the original. I think part of it was that when I played it, I remember thinking that the Midgar part was the entire game. Exactly what you're saying you don't like about this one necessarily is that's what I thought it was, and I think I was very surprised to learn, when it does put you out on the world map. I think because I hadn't really played any RPGs like that prior. That was sort of my first experience. So I wasn't aware of how big the games are. So my thought was, oh, it's a substantial enough game just being in the Midgar area. But that's kind of when you get out is kind of when the game really begins. And so that was an exciting experience for me because I thought, oh man, the adventure's just kind of beginning at this point where I thought it was about to end. So that was a nice treat that probably one of my favorite gaming memories was realizing how much there is to Final Fantasy and how big these epic RPGs could be.
Yeah, I just hope they put part two on PS4 and not PS5.
Oh yeah, yeah. Although I don't know. Yeah, they're I'm not entirely sure about the dates on that, but I don't think they've announced. I don't think they've made any announcements, right, in terms of when the game might release.
Yeah, I hadn't heard. I just heard them talk about Final Fantasy 16 that was going to be on PS5.
Oh yeah, that's a new announcement, isn't it?
Yeah, that one was kind of dark for my taste.
I didn't watch anything about it, so it's kind of a darker direction.
Yeah, it's kind of more like it'll probably end up being mature rated because it has like blood flying everywhere and stuff.
Oh, that's different. That's not very Final Fantasy. Yeah, yeah. It does tend to rub me the wrong way when you take something like that is a franchise, I guess, that has a pretty specific vibe, and it kind of gets modified a little bit more than maybe at least somebody would come to expect from that universe because it's the same kind of thing. I think it's the same kind of thing when you see the remake is that it can be an uncomfortable experience to see something you're used to turn into something else. So I guess maybe if they're moving in that more mature direction, and that's another strange move to me. But it's not my world.
Yeah, another example I can think of is the Jack and Daxter games, where like the second one was way different than the first one. Like they tried to make it like really dark and stuff.
Hmm. Wait. What they made? What really dark?
The Jack and Daxter series.
Oh, yeah. Jack and Daxter is one of those games that people continually get confused with Insomniac titles because they were kind of buddy buddy back in the day, and the development teams knew each other. But yeah, Naughty Dog is the developer of Jack. Jack always kind of had that 90s tude thing going on. But I at least from what I remember, those are also games I've never played. Never played Jack and Daxter, any of them. But I remember them kind of not really appealing to me because of that more that kind of do you know what I mean when I say 90s tude? Is that kind of a common is that a
Yeah,
thing?
kind of like the more not mean spirited, but yeah, kind of like the edgy attitude thing. Yeah.
Edgy, but still kind of 90s safe. Like they would have characters who would wear, they just would. It's like you would give a character tude when they would just use like surfer expressions, and they would have like glasses on, sunglasses on, and really baggy clothes, and it would just sort of be this running thing that all of these classic franchises would be tudified, where I think they did it like with Looney Tunes at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting move. So
Yeah, I remember years ago I tried to play the second Jack and Daxter game, and it was like they were like cursing in every sentence and trying to be all like adult and stuff. And it's like really weird.
yeah, this is a strange move for this franchise. Yeah, I don't know about that. I've got for the shadow. I've one of the things that bothers me about using the multiply shadow layers, where you create a separate layer for shadows, is you can use different tones. Like I could go in here and with a darker purple color, right, and get like a darker tone on the same layer. But the problem with doing that is I kind of like keeping things non-destructive, in the sense that I might want to adjust the colors of this shadow layer later. But if I'm working with these different tones, different colors, I can kind of paint myself into a corner. So what I've done here is I've actually made a separate shadow layer that goes on top of the other one. And for this, this is where I'm doing this sort of ambient occlusion effect. So like where the knees meet up with the pad here, there's kind of an extra shadow layer here, and where objects collide, and you get that extra little darkening effect. And I find that helps to kind of really add to the realism overall. And it's one of those little subtle additions that you can do here and there that will, I think, really make things shine a bit. I'm going to put some shadow into this page here, as though the page is kind of wrinkled up.
Yeah.
Sarah does not take very good care of the sketch pad. So it gets a little wrinkled up. Maybe some torn pages.
Looks like she's been chewing on the markers too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you're holding too many markers, all right, you can put them down. And then you have to sort through them. But if you're going back and forth between like two colors, the most common thing is I'm just gonna bite the marker. I'm just gonna bite the marker while I use the other one. And the more into the art that I get, the more careless I'm going to be with the markers. They're going to be all over the place. The caps are going to be, off the markers, and it'll just be a mess of markers. But this is one of the things that you don't have to worry about when you're working digitally. Although I do occasionally chew on the iPad. Probably shouldn't do that. Although knowing Apple, they'll make future generation iPads have a nice flavor.
Probably.
And then you can pick your flavor. Pick your flavor iPad. And then those fruit names that they use for colors, like what do they remember the iMacs back in the day when everything was the name of a fruit for color? Like it wasn't orange, it was tangerine or something like that. So
yeah, I never really kept up with Apple stuff.
They could make them taste like tangerine. Why not? When you're done, when it's no longer working and it's time to get a new computer, you can eat your old computer. It's
yeah.
Yeah, just a couple little wrinkles. I don't know. It's a weird thing, but it adding this kind of realism to the page just makes it come to life. Don't you think? I before I started the stream, I was decided that I wanted to add tone into the bottom right corner because I didn't have that. It was just over white. Like the pad was over white, which is why the arms look a little strange here. And I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with that. But I think I need to have this darker tone here in the bottom right. In the original scene, I had very dark tone. And I think one of the reasons I want to have that dark tone is because it lets me put some sort of sparkly, glowy effects, which I really want to have in the scene. Because even though it's in the real world, when she's drawing in the tablet, there's kind of a magical effect that occurs where even if it's just in her mind, I want to sort of symbolize that with some sparklies and things like that. Add a bit of a shine to the page. And I need the dark color to contrast so that you can actually see them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how many pages did you say the first book was going to be?
It's probably going to be around 100 pages, maybe 96 or so. Originally, it was a longer format, a longer page count, and I was going to use I was going to have 3 books originally. The reason that I changed it is that to develop enough content to get like a book that long with this kind of art would take a very long time. And so I didn't want to have such a long gap between the books. And so I thought I would rather have shorter books that come out a little more frequently. And that would keep people interested in it because I don't want it to be years between the books. Because even if you have like a really long book, if you go too long, and too long would be like really longer than a year, is when I think people start to kind of maybe lose interest. And it's a little harder to get people back to support future books. So I need to make sure maybe this is not as big of a problem as I'm making it out to be, but I kind of think that I need to release more books that have less content. But yeah, about 100 pages as it is right now. The nice part about it is the illustrated book nature of Dreamside makes it such that I think people will spend a little bit more time on the individual pages. So you're less likely to flip through it quite as quickly as you might if it's a comic format, just like a pure comic format. I've got to film a video for the Kickstarter, which is challenging to do well. And it's especially hard right now because I was going to film in a hospital when I was planning to do a Dreamside video for obvious reasons, but that's not really feasible right now. Can't really go into a hospital. I mean, it's hard enough normally because you have to you can't walk into a camera. You can't walk into a camera. You can't walk into a hospital with a camera, for legal reasons. And then on top of that, we've got the virus, and so it's challenging. So I might be stuck with some exterior shots. Although we do have a hospital here that is Oshai Children's Hospital, which is in Buffalo, New York, that has an exterior that it's got a really cool design. So maybe I'll just go and see if I can get some shots for that. And I think most of the shots will probably be limited to showing the book itself, which I think
that would probably work.
I mean, you want to show a little bit of stuff about the making of, and I think, for Yuka, it was kind of a mix. He showed the art, of course, and then I had a few shots of myself, and There was some kind of abstract stuff of me playing video games. A lot of it was just very spur of the moment. Like I wanted to get some shots in a comic store, and we have this really cool comic store around here that was a converted cider mill. So it's got this. It's like the kind of wood in Disneyland. Like it has that big thick wood planks, and it's just really neat. It's a very cool place. I'm like, hey, let's go get some shots, in the cider mill comic store. And while I was in there, we realized that they had some arcade games, and so we we quickly got like a couple of shots of tapping buttons on an arcade console. So when I was talking about just games in general, we had some B roll footage for that.
Cool.
You just figured out as you go. I don't know, it worked for Yuka. Although one thing I learned about the video is don't record audio. Like you have to kind of do all the audio at once, all the VO all at once. Because if you do it separately, it always sounds it never matches what you've already done. Like the conditions of the room that you're in will have changed slightly. Your voice will sound a little bit different. Maybe it's a different time of day. And if it doesn't sync up, it just suddenly sounds like it's really weird in the video because suddenly the voice will pop into like sounding like a different person.
Yeah.
So, which is a pain because I did a lot of editing with the audio, and I thought, oh, I'll just re-record the section that needs work, and yeah, that was a bad idea. I don't know what to do with these arms because I don't want to. I don't like this severed arm look. I might do a silhouette. Yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna do. This is tricky because I learned a lesson while I was working on this that if I'm gonna do this vignette look, the problem with it is I have the shadow layer separately from the color, right? So if the color fades out like this, fades to white, when I put the shadow over, it's not, it's covering a slightly different amount of it. And so it kind of looks a little strange if the shadow goes over the color. So I'm like, what I really should have done is do a layer on top of everything that is just white. And that's the framing. So it's actually on top of everything rather than trying to make all the layers have the same amount of coverage. So lesson learned. I'm going to do that from now on with future pages. Yeah.
Well, did you say that you had the part under the arms that was white before?
Yeah.
Well, maybe you could try that again because it was sort of matched the page to the left where it's like fading into white.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm going to draw in a line here for where the arm would be, and then I'll just eliminate it later just so I know where I'm tracing here. Because if she's the weird thing about it is like her, if you were actually seeing this, like if the camera was filming this here, then you would see maybe her shoulder up here, and it would kind of obstruct this arm. Like the shoulder might be here and the head might be there. But if I just have it cut off like that, it's going to be really weird. And I don't want to render the head and the shoulder because it won't fade out. So I'm kind of cheating this here a little bit. So let's just extend the arm. And I guess this is about where the bend would occur. Right around there. I know anatomy. And then I'll take this right off the page. All right. And then I'll erase all the shadow. And that'll make it just fade to white. Oops. Very helpful selection features with this program. Oh God, that does not work. Yeah, it's because you would have like her chest would be here and her shoulder would be here, and so it just looks like her arms are just this alien shape. I think what I need to do is it'll just eliminate some of that extra. I'm gonna undo here a whole bunch of times. All right. Yeah, I think I just need to take away some of the darkness and the shadow.
Yeah, could you just turn all that purple shadow back into white so then her arms kind of fade into the white instead of into the purple?
That's what I think I'm going to do here. I'm just going to get rid of the purple here and just have it connect. Good thinking. These are the kinds of maybe obvious things to other people. But as I'm working on them, I just can't figure out what to do. That's the benefit of a team. I think I need to eliminate that blue too. Yeah, that's working better. Christina to the rescue. Yeah, it definitely works better. And you know what? I can actually get a harsh edge here. I always look for a nice juxtaposition with hard and soft edges because it's just super appealing if you can make that work, especially with a vignette style. So like her arm on the right here can definitively end here, but then just a little bit to the left and it kind of fades in a more abstract way. It's so funny that when you're working with characters like this that you have to be so careful kind of with the anatomy. You have to make sure that you don't, the arm looks like a bodybuilder's arm in this one shot. I've had times when I've used my own hands as reference for the characters, and I'm like, why do their hands look like they're 35-year-old hands? And so I have to convert it. I like look at my hand as reference, and then I think, okay, just pretend your hand is not as old as it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely a good move. I might even have, maybe I'll put some little pockets of dark color that I can surround with these gems that I'm thinking about adding. Procreate has some cool brushes already for that, but I think I make everything myself because, of course, I've got to merge these buildings together. So Procreate has this great feature. So although it does limit the layers, what I can do is I can select each one of these, for example, right? So I'm selecting this building, and then I can save this selection of this building. And then I can do it for this one, and the third, and then finally the fourth. And I do this because I can then merge them all together. So that will reduce the layer load. There you go. All right. So there, I just made 4 layers into one. And, you know, I'm going to get rid of the building lines. So this is consolidating layers. I also don't actually need the text because that's more just for me to know where everything has to go for the most part. But I don't think I need that right now because I'm going to be redrawing it. So I need to do a little bit of cleanup there because now I can have a little bit of fun with the sparkly effects. Procreate has some really cool tools for doing sparkly effects, but I don't know if I'm going to use them or if I'm going to do my own. It has this glimmer brush. You can make your own for this as well, of course. But it's kind of helpful to try it out. So like that's what it looks like. So I paint those really quickly, and then kind of use them as a foundation for my own designs that I want to have. Need a little bit of color variance with them too. You don't want them all to be the same color, same size. Pretty neat, huh? I can go over the same one a few times to make it brighter. It's funny how weird this kind of thing is when you really think about it. That she's sitting here and there are sparkly lights while she's drawing in the real world. That doesn't really make any sense. But when you see it in the context of the story, I think it just kind of works.
Yeah, I think it looks cool in that scene.
And I'm trying to make it seem kind of magical because it's not long into the book that you see the real world and the fantasy world begin to blend. And so I'm starting to suggest that at this point in the story. It would be very easy just to hit, dot all over the place with this. But that's so lazy. We don't want to do that. You got to kind of make them custom and make sure that they're positioned nicely so that they blend nicely with everything. I'm not just putting them randomly. I'm thinking about kind of the ideal positioning for little sparkly effects. And hopefully this obsessive attention to sparkly effect position will be appreciated. I'm not just wasting my time. I have some that are a little bit darker tone. Because what I can do is I can actually duplicate this layer and give it change the layer style, put it down to about halfway, and then I can blur it. So that makes them really glow.
Yeah, that looks
maybe a little bit less. But yeah, little things like that. I mean, you see how it just makes it magical? It's really neat how that works.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll show you something really cool here because it's about time to see something cool, I think. I mean, I've been just putzing around here, but I'm going to do something really cool. All right, overlay, and I'm going to blow out the colors here a bit. People are always complimenting the colors, but really a lot of it is this process. We'll go in and do this amplification of colors. I'll usually use an airbrush for it, a soft airbrush, and this overlay layer style. And what I do is I go into areas where I have, say for example, the eyes, right? What I do is I pick the color that is closest to the color that is there, and then I color over it on an overlay layer. And see how that just lit her eyes up?
Yeah.
With overlay layer, it's amplifying the colors that are underneath. You have to be very careful about doing this because you can not only blow the colors out a little too much, but you can end up, I should probably be underneath the line for this, but you can end up making the colors so intense that they will not print well when they convert to CMYK. Because when you're working on the screen, everything's doable. I can make it super, super vivid, but if I go a little too nuts, when we try to convert it to CMYK color, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And you get a sort of a color, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a little bit of color bleed in areas where tones that will absorb and reflect a lot of light, like skin, for example, which has a lot of what's called subsurface scattering. It projects a lot of light. And what happens is when light hits a surface, you know this if you listened to me in the past, is when light hits a surface, it bounces off that surface and it takes some of the color of that surface with it. So, for example, right here on the hair, this band right here is kind of a hot pink. And because there's a pretty bright light shining down on it, the light's going to hit this bright hair. It's going to hit the underside of this band, and then it's going to bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And every time it hits, it's taking a little bit of the color with it. So I'm going to amplify that pink on the hair. And you see how that just it really, you can see the color bleed of the band on her head. The same thing is going to happen on the wall, by the way. So if you ever want to see this in the real world, just take something that has a really bright color like a plastic, and look at a material like plastic too, because plastic is it's going to it's more of a translucent material than, say, a metal. And if you have a very colorful plastic, hold it in the bright light, hold your hand above it, and watch how it colors your hand as the light bounces off the plastic surface. It's a really cool effect. Sometimes I'll do this too, not even considering the specific color that's being used, but I'll amplify just to kind of hype up a specific color that gives a certain emotional state. Because in this case, see, I gave her cheeks a little too much of a blush. Because there's like for Sarah, she really loses herself in what she's doing with her art. So this is kind of for her. This is like it's a really magical experience for her to create things, and so I want to symbolize that with the colors. You got to be really careful with these pinks, because magentas, the sort of like very, very intense pinks that are not close enough to magenta, but they move a little bit more toward purple and violets, and maybe like hot pinks and stuff, that just cannot be reproduced in the book. It just doesn't happen, because you CMYK color that goes on paper for offset book printing cannot reproduce these intense purples. So a lot of times when you go to print, people are very disappointed when they realize that their beautiful digital colors are not being reproduced on paper. But it's physically impossible. It's not impossible to get certain amplified colors that go outside the CMYK range, but you actually have to use special inks. So like it's possible for some printers to do like they can add specialty colors. So you have your CMYK, and then you have a fifth color. Like let's say that you use an exceptional amount of purple. Well, the reason that the purples look kind of dull is because to make the purple, they're mixing cyan and magenta, right? And that can only make such a vivid purple. But if you have an ink that's specially formulated to be a very intense purple, then you can add a fifth color to the process. And but that's extremely expensive to do, and doesn't really fit within the budget of most mass-produced books. So if you're ever wondering why books can sometimes look a little dull compared to their digital counterpoints, it's because it's impossible to get those colors on paper. But because that doesn't mean that I might not have a physical or a digital book. And in a digital book, it can just be what I'm doing right here. I've got to color the outlines around her shirt. That's going to make a big difference. Outline coloring makes a ton of difference, even though it doesn't seem like it should, because it's a very, very subtle process. But that subtlety causes the line to recede into the rendering of the piece. So it stops commanding so much attention. Because the more contrast you have, the more attention, right, is taken. And everything's a balance. You got to remember that everything is a balance in an image. It's not just adding more. You're never adding more. You're changing things, but as you add things, you take away from other things. So it's like as you add attention in one place, you're taking attention away from other places. So there's no such thing as just make it better by adding more. It means that you're changing the priority of the viewer's attention. And by shifting it away from lines like this, for example, I can move your attention more toward the character. Because these are important to have because they tell a story, But I only want to have so much attention go towards, say, for example, these window pane lines. Because they're just not important. But everything about her pose is important. There's a reason, like this pose is worked and worked and reworked with lots of sketches. Like, why is she sitting like this? There's so much communicated about the way that she's sitting. You'll notice also that she's drawn her legs up from the previous pose, right? So, when I'm drawing, for example, sometimes I'll realize that I'm hunching because I'm getting into what I'm doing a little bit more. And I'm sure you realize this if you ever sat at a computer and you're just typing, you'll find yourself suddenly looking like, Igor.
Yep.
your head, 2 inches from the screen. Well, that's because your brain loses its ability to maintain your posture because you're so distracted by what you're doing. Well, here the same thing happens to her. She's drawn the pad up closer to her face, and she's kind of curled up a little bit more, and that's because you can tell she's really getting into what she's doing. So there's a progression to the posing, so that you can kind of get a feeling of the sensational experience that she's having through the creation, and then you get to see what she's drawing. And of course, when I'm done with this piece, I'm making the eyes glow on the Dream Girl character here.
Oh, that'll be cool.
Yeah, just a little bit of a. Actually, I can put that on the same glow layer. I'll do a little bit of that right now. Use the colored pencil hatch, and we're going to use a yellow tone. A little bit of a impossible glow on the paper. The glowy eyes are something that's a really cool tool, but gotta be real careful because it doesn't take much for it to look super creepy.
Yeah.
And I think I may have gone too far. Because this character is not supposed to feel creepy, but she's definitely hyperhuman. She's a little bit, and this is of course a drawing of her, but when you see her, she is she's exaggerated. She's just a little pushed. I like to use a comparison because a movie came out not too long ago that has a very different intention behind doing this to a character than I'm trying to do, but it actually is kind of the same logic, and that is Stephen King's It. Because the character of Pennywise in It, I'm a fan of fantasy horror, as well as this sort of that's why I like games like Silent Hill and things like that are very scary, because they I like that they provide a very potent environment for the kind of interesting moral challenges that you can give a character. I love that. I love that it has a very distinct, powerful darkness from which the character can emerge. You appreciate the light all the more if it's emerging from darkness. So it's one of the things that I really love about horror. And Dreamside has some horrific elements to it. It's not extremely dark. It's not something that would be very inappropriate for kids. We'll put it that way. There's no violence or anything like that. But it is scary from time to time. And the character of the Dream Girl is just a little hyper real in the sense that her head is almost Her eyes are just a little too far apart. They're a little too big. Uh, her hair does not obey the laws of physics. And her movements, her posings, everything are hyper exaggerated. I even play with the limb length and things like that. There are times when she'll reach her arm out and point, and the arm will stretch a little too far, and it's disquieting, but it's subtle enough that you wouldn't really notice. But page by page, she gives you a kind of hyper real effect, and that reminds you that she's not a human being. She's not of this world, and that I like doing things like that are just a little bit unnerving because they keep the player. You tell they come from games.
Yeah.
They keep the reader on the edge of their seat because they don't really know what's going to happen when they turn the page. I don't want any safety when you're reading my stories. I want you to feel as though I could really scare you when you turn the page because I really have your attention then. And that creates a potent sort of experience. If you know that there are going to be limitations in a story, it's one of the reasons I don't like ratings. If you know that there's never going to be anything beyond a certain point, you can kind of relax when you read a story because you're not nervous about what's going to happen. But Sarah's going through an extremely challenging experience in the story, and I need you to feel a little bit of that as you read it. And if you're too passive in your involvement, then you're not going to empathize enough with her uh, challenge as a character. So I sometimes I need to kind of scare the audience a little bit, and even characters like the Dream Girl, who are designed to be extremely friendly and approachable and kind and encouraging and inspiring. She's essentially goodness personified as a character. Uh, I still need it to be a little otherworldly, so that you kind of feel like the ground could give out beneath me here, and that I think that keeps it exciting.
Yeah.
And it never gets dark for the sake of being dark. It gets dark
Yeah.
because I want to contrast it with the light,
Yeah.
and that makes the light sing when it's very dark.
True. Yeah, I don't like stuff that's just like constantly dark. But yeah, like you said about like the light coming out of the darkness. I like
Mhm.
those kinds of stories.
Yeah, yeah. It need. What's the purpose of doing a story that is purely grotesquely dark for the sake of being dark? I definitely I do enjoy stories like that because I like everything. um, I'm kind of lame like that, Christina. I like everything. But I do like classic, horror movies and things like that, and things like, those old slasher horror movies and stuff like that. I enjoy that stuff. But I think one of the reasons that stuff actually appeals to me is because there is always a strong lesson component to those kind of tragic movies, where you have, you show the outcome of bad decision making, and I like that sort of lesson component to it. And even if it's something that's made for kids, something like Dreamside that's a bit more whimsical and light, I still need to have those elements in there because it's just the only way to make um, the moments that I'm trying to make more impactful. It's the only way to make them really hit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of it is like for me being a Christian is like in real life I can see like the light out of the darkness. So it's like I like to read stories like that too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because how do you make a story that resonates with people on a uh, I guess I don't want to use the word spiritual, but on a way that hits people on a core level that they can understand without necessarily having to share the experience of the protagonist. And I think that if what you have to do in order to get there is to shake the reader's heart. Okay, you have to shake their heart. You have to grab the heart and shake it. Okay, and to shake the heart, you have to create something that is universal in its experience, something that everybody can understand, even if they don't admit that it's a universal experience. And there are universal rules that work consistently throughout time, and simple things, not overly complex. Not trying to be tricky here. It's more things like, you know, something like greed. Greed is bad as a universal rule. It's very easy to understand. If you have a character who is overly greedy, without getting into the specifics of the character, that is a universally understood uh, attribute that you can give the character that people will understand and empathize with as being a vice. And so if you can work with these kinds of universal vices, universal virtues, then you can create a very relatable situation for a character. And you can shake the reader's heart because they can understand that sort of universal truth, because we all know what that feels like.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, it's isn't it amazing what you can do with these outlines? It's just push them back a little bit, and suddenly it looks a lot more tightly rendered. I'm liking where this is going. All right, I'm gonna put a little bit of blue. So she's got one of the ways that I can further communicate that she's kind of getting balled up in her little world here is to create a warmth around her that's in this little huddle here, and then surround it by a colder tone around it. So I can do that with my overlay layer. And so I'm going to use a blue tone that is a little bit colder. Not I don't want to go too much toward purple because it's going to start warming up. And I'll use a blue tone with maybe the hatch brush, and I'm going to go over the area that's kind of distant from her. And this is one of those things you have to really watch out for, because when it goes to print, sometimes these colors will, when they convert, they'll be very, very bold. And something that looks kind of subtle here might be a little too commanding in print. Yeah, see, just giving it a bit of a gradient toward blue warms up what's going on in the middle here by contrast. I can push that further also by literally using warm tones. Let's go overhead and maybe a little bit around the head too. It just comes to life, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's looking really cool.
Thank you. I'm going to do the same around the dream girl, because she's creating a drawing, but this is not just a drawing. It's a portal. When she draws the dream girl, she's opening a portal. And so it has to kind of glow off the page. It doesn't glow off the page for everybody, but it does for her. And so when we see that, it's got to look pretty magical. But the lines around her fingers now are too dark. This is a process of doing things and then realizing what has to be done from there, because I can't see every change that has to be made. I don't have the vision to just see things like that. I can only respond, and as I look at the fingers, I'm realizing, okay, the hands are a little too intense, and there's just the lines are just too dark. So I'm gonna pull back on them a little bit by using a brighter tone, so they blend a little bit more with the page behind them. And it's a balancing act.
Yeah. So you don't normally like to use black outlines for objects, just like a darker version of whatever the original color is?
I do. It just depends. Like, I would do that for a different art style. If it's something where I wanted to do something that used like a very kind of comic-y, say a very graphic, flat color look, maybe that would be a perfect time to use black outlines. Like I've had times where, or maybe if I'm doing kind of a classic comic look that uses black fills. So if I use black fills, black outlines are pretty much a necessity for that. And there are cases where the black outline will absolutely look better than a colored outline. But in this case, because I have such a soft, gentle rendering on the character, the harsh black outlines are just that. They're too harsh, and so they just don't really work, in my opinion, as well with the softer rendering style. So I tend to go through and do this process of lightening the lines. But yeah, I would use black. I would use black outlines if the particular project called for it. In fact, something I just drew last night that's for that other video game related thing is working with black outlines. It's great. And black outlines, I mean, I wish they were more appropriate for Dreamside because it's much faster to work with black outlines. I don't
Yeah.
have to go through this coloring process. But what I found with Dreamside is I kind of made this commitment to myself that I had to break because I cannot do it. Is that I said if I'm going to go back to Dreamside after Yucca, I have to make it go faster. I just like there's no way for me to do it if I'm working at the same speed. I did speed things up a little bit, but Dreamside just cannot be rushed that much. There's just it when I try and do a simpler art style or something that's a little quicker or maybe more cartoony, I hate it. Like it's not what it's designed to be. You get these things that I think of as gifts, and they're not things that I create. They're things that pop into my head, and you can do justice or honor to them, or you can not. And I figure if I have something that I think is a particularly lovely gift, then I want to honor it and do a good job with it. Otherwise, it's kind of no one's demanding that I do a complicated art style for this, but I kind of feel like I'm dishonoring the gift that I have if I don't give it everything.
Yeah. Yeah, and you haven't actually started the campaign yet, so you're not like in a hurry to get it out by a certain date.
Well, no, but I do have bills to pay, so those are my restrictions. But yes, you're right. It's I do delay the campaign for just that very reason. Is that I want to get as far as I can because Yuka definitely blew out of past the expected deadline. Most of that actually had to do with manufacturing complexities, and the actual creative work still took longer than I expected. I think I probably added about 3.5 months or so overall to the development just purely through me doing taking longer to finish the art than I needed to. And some of that is because, it just took longer, to do. I just didn't estimate it properly. And some of it was, maybe I didn't work as hard as I needed to on certain days. Maybe I didn't keep to the schedule the way that I should have. And maybe there were some pages that I redid that I didn't have to redo, that sort of thing. But, if you can find me the perfect artist, then then we'll just have that artist do everything. But as it is with me, I can only art is such a subjective process. It's such a it's very very hard to get a guaranteed good result on any given day. Because so much of this depends on my state of mind. And the artists are so crazy that if we have a bad day, it affects the actual result of the art. Like you can see it in the art if artist had a bad day.
Yeah, I've experienced that too with my art and writing and everything.
I'm sure that blends over into all kinds of creative pursuits. If you have a bad day, but if you feel really good about it, you tend to do better work. And so sometimes, unfortunately, I'll just have a bad day, with what I'm trying to do, and that shows in the art. And then I think, oh well, I just have to fight through this because I can't not work today because then I won't be on schedule. You know what I mean? But the irony of that is sometimes if you take a break, you'll come back to it stronger and fix the problem right away. I've had that happen a number of times where I'll be stuck on a problem all day and just have absolutely no ability to fix it. And I just finish the day in just a foul mood. because I just could not make the problem go away. And then I'll go to sleep dejected, and I'll wake up in the morning, and it's like a cloud has lifted, and it's just the most obvious fix in the world. And then I feel like $1,000,000 the next day, and then everything to do the next day is brilliant, and then I think, okay, I'm back on a roll, and then I'll have a bad day again. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how it goes. It's back and forth with that. I have not figured out the formula for how to avoid having those kinds of bad days, and I don't think there is one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I try to do writing and drawing and stuff like in between editing projects when I have time off, and I kind of like overthink everything, and then it's like not fun anymore, and then it turns out really bad.
Yeah, 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 you just have to deal with it. It's tough, and there are people out there who seem to be able to push through that in incredible levels of success, and I'm not one of them, unfortunately. But you can use that as an excuse to not make stuff, but that's lame. That's lame. We have to do what we have to do. It's like, all right. So maybe it takes me a bit longer to do it, but that doesn't mean it won't get done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I feel like I have like these God-given gifts, and then like I try to like overthink it, and then it's like not fun, but it's like I feel like I have to do them anyway because they're my gifts.
Yeah, yeah. That kind of goes back to the dishonoring concept. Is you want to, if you have an ability to do something and you have the desire to do it, um, there is really you will only upset yourself more in the future if you don't uh, at least look into it. I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody saying, "Hey, look, you know what? I don't have a lot of ambition to do this kind of thing." Not everybody has that, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that you're meant to do something else, or you have a different calling, so to speak. But if you do want to do something, that you shouldn't ever really give up, especially if the reason that you're giving up is because of pressure. If you have anybody telling you that oh, it's inappropriate or you can't do this, it's just the thing is they might even have a point. This is the thing you never really hear. Sometimes people telling you that you shouldn't bother doing something, they might have a point, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It means maybe your approach is off. Maybe you have to try a different angle. Okay, but it never really outright means stop.
Yeah, it's kind of more like me putting pressure on myself.
Oh, you're your own harshest bully, for sure. Because nobody can read your mind, but you know what you know. You know what's going on. You know if you're faking yourself. You know that if the thing that you say is a real problem is not really a problem. And that happens to me all the time, and I'm always trying to ignore myself when I want to yell at myself. Um, but unfortunately, that sort of self correction has to happen in order to actually get something done that's challenging. You know what I mean? This is very dramatic music.
Oh, sorry, I'm back. I had to mute it again.
Are your dogs barking again?
Yeah, it's probably the deer outside.
Deer outside. The place where I live occasionally has deer show up. There's like a family of deer that live not too far away from here, and they'll just come and hang out in the backyard. Have this pear tree out there that they really love that pear tree. I'm liking where this is going. I got to get a little bit more shadow in this, which I'm going to do on my extra shadow layer here. So like if I just add more on a separate layer, I'll get just a little extra darkness where the foot here collides with the surface. And this extra shadow just makes it a lot more realistic. Time consuming, but probably worth it. Probably worth it. So many of these changes are made um, with such minor instant results, such that you look at it and you're like, I don't even know if anyone can tell the difference. But cumulative, they're noticeable in the sense that they create an overall improved image, even if people don't necessarily have the ability to pull out exactly what difference that one particular change made. You know what I mean? It's kind of the same thing that happens with the outlines. And then sometimes I'm just wasting my time. It's hard to know which. Oh, looks like I lost Christina. That's what I get for hosting a 3-hour stream. It's almost 3 hours, actually. How's everyone doing? Is anyone still with me? Am I by myself? I'm thinking that I might step away from this soon. So I think I've got it in a good place. Here's your little Robotoid. Sarah's got lots of Robotoids. That's a a fake toy line that is part of Dreamside. She loves these figures. I had considered at one point making a whole storyline for Roblotoids. Still am, actually. Helena, you're still here. Now, when I had your avatar up, it looks like it has a drawing in it. So, are you an artist as well? What sort of things do you like to work on? Hello, Banana Meteor. Welcome back. Your avatar picture is old. That's okay. I'm not gonna judge you. What do we think, folks? Are we are we digging this or what? Because I'm kind of digging it. I have a tendency to overwork things. This, of course, will be no exception. You know what I want to do? I think I've got enough description here. I want to get a little hint of her legs in here behind the pad. Because the way I had it before, it kind of worked because It was it was sort of abstract in its the way it was floating in space, but now that I've actually added the dark tone behind it, I kind of feel like I need to not have it be floating. I need to get rid of this extra color here. So much of this stuff is just cleaning up. This is the kind of stuff that nobody would ever notice. But I have to clean it up or it'll drive me nuts. Christina, it's great having you. Of course, we need to do lots more streams. This is a lot of fun, and you know, it'd be great to get more of your insight on the editing processes. And we'd love to hear more about how the Kingdom Hearts manga goes. Can't wait to check it out when it's out and available. So yeah, we'll see you next time. It's amazing how different it looks when you turn off most of the layers. All right, I'm gonna just sketch in some ideas for where her legs could be. All right, so probably if we're following the same this is just a sketch to find the positioning that it won't actually have them drawn in like this. Angle is off. Probably right around there. So that seems about right in terms of their position. All right, so I'll turn the opacity of that down, and then I'm just going to use a black color, and I'll just draw in the actual lines. Yeah, take her arm down too. And I'm not going to show this part of her leg, though, I don't think. Maybe I will. Let's see what that looks like. So the reason I don't want to show this part of the leg is because I'm fading out over here with the arm. And if I show the leg, it's going to be kind of weird unless I extend the arm out further, which I don't want to do. I already tried doing that. So I think I'll let the pad here, this will kind of be the edge of this panel. And then this will just be the leg in here. So let me try bringing that in. So I've got to turn off everything again. So I can identify the right color, delete the rough. All right, let's see. All right, so pick the color of the pants. And I want to do this on a separate layer because I don't know if I'm going to keep it. And I don't want to be forced to use this because I drew it on the same layer. Or rather, if I decide to eliminate it later, it's going to be a lot harder if I do it on the same layer. It's much easier if I do this separately. All right, as we get over here, this is a little tricky. I think I'm going to fade out. Let's see what this looks like. Trial and error, that's what this is. All right, I'm going to take some of the lighter tone. I like doing this slight gradient color, as you probably know by now. So add little tonal variations. Makes a huge difference. I don't know if I like this already. I think the problem with it is that these legs are going off the panel, off the page here, but it's out of balance with the rest of it because nothing else touches the edge like that. So this might be a mistake. I don't know. Help me decide. The light's also coming from behind, too. I think I'm going to keep it because I think it really helps sell the different paneling. I'm going to pull it out a little bit. This is why I never get anything done. This is a tough call. I'm digging it. I think I'm going to keep it. Man, your voice really gets tired after doing these. So sorry if I suddenly sound like I'm 20 years older. So for other artists here, what sort of art tools are you using? And are you mainly traditional or do you work digitally? I need to make sure that this actually looks like fabric. So she's holding the pad on her legs like this, then it would bunch up the fabric a little bit and you would get some wrinkles. So it looks like Helena just does digital art. Banana Meteor does traditional. Digital is beyond her grasp. No, it's not. It's not tricky. It's like anything. You get used to it. I mean, there are people who would say that the traditional tools you're working with are beyond their grasp if they had never used a pencil before. But it's really just whatever we're comfortable with. There are plenty of people who do art using both these days, and then there are people who combine them. You're a disaster when it comes to inks or paints or anything more than a simple pencil. That's just it's just practice. I'm sure if you got used to it. I need to figure out what to do with the ends of these markers here. The thing is, I didn't want to take them too far out because this segment, basically to about here, not that far in, probably right about here, is where the page gets chopped for the print. So I'm just going to do an extra short cap on these. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to get rid of this cap. And get rid of, whoops, I'm on the wrong layer. That is a mistake that I've made many times. There's nothing worse than doing a lot of detail on something and then realizing that you did it on the wrong layer, provided that it's not easy to salvage. Because a lot of times I've just, when the first few times that happened to me, I thought, okay, I need to figure out how to save what I did. But eventually you realize it's just faster, usually, to just bite the bullet and redo it on the correct layer. And get rid of this line. And then I'm just going to use this base color, and I'm just going to get rid of the cap. Because I don't think we need that anyway. I didn't realize that the Xenoblade soundtrack turned into nonstop choral music toward the end. Yeah, so this way it's like she's got the cap under here, and that way I can end it. Oh, I'm not a smart person. I am not a smart person. I just realized. Because I can just move the cap in more like this. So like I'm trying to be consistent with the size of the cap. I don't want to have this one just be strangely short. Because weird things like that, even though they seem unimportant, it can kind of stick in the reader's mind. They actually become something that the reader focuses on, and I don't want that to happen. But since she's holding it like this at an angle, it can only go so far into her hand here. So these are the kinds of things that keep me up at night. All right, I'm going to I think I'm going to close these up because they just don't really, with adding her legs like this, I think vignetting them out like this is not, wrong layer again. See, we'd have been working all day. It's very easy to make these kinds of mistakes. You really want to learn how to paint properly. All right, you can do it. The boot camp for artists is figure drawing. It teaches you pretty much everything you need to know. You can apply it to different mediums. So if you want to work with paint, no problem. It's obviously you need to learn the specifics of any particular medium, but figure drawing is great because it's so hard to do. The human body is very, very difficult to draw in a way that's accurate, and part of the reason for that is because we so thoroughly recognize when a body doesn't look correct, especially faces. If faces are off, it's a mess because we're accustomed to seeing people, and we're sort of biologically wired to recognize if someone's a human being or not. That's why we can kind of tell if somebody was, say, a wax sculpture or maybe a robot. All right, we'd probably be able to tell pretty quickly that that's not a human being. because we have these wonderful abilities to recognize the humanity in other people. And I mean that kind of in a physical sense. Like we can recognize that someone's a human being because of the way they look, the way they move. And so when you're drawing, when you're doing figure drawing, it's extremely difficult because you can't fool people with the human body. So you really have to get it right. So because of that, because it's so challenging to do, it's really great exercise as an artist. So figure drawing is how I trained, and I can never advocate enough for it as a way to learn. And whether you want to paint or you want to draw or you want to sketch or you want to use any medium, or even if you want to work in CG and work on models, I mean, figure drawing is extremely useful for learning all that stuff. This music is putting me to sleep. What else we got? Oh, that's better. Now this outline that I put on this marker is too light, because before it was over white, but now that it's over a darker color, I have to darken the outlines to make sure it's visible. By the way, let me know if music bothers you in these, because I know that people like to sometimes put on their own music at the same time as they're watching these. At least I do. Sometimes if I'm listening to somebody or watching an art live stream or whatever like this, I like to sometimes mix in my own music. And that doesn't really work if the person is playing music on their channel. But it does help me draw a little bit better. And I tend to listen to music when I'm working for that reason. I don't know about you, but I think adding her legs was a good idea. It just gives a little bit more dimension. And it also clarifies what we're looking at. Not that it was that confusing before, but I think that we don't just have the sketchbook floating in space anymore. I think that's an improvement. Yes. All right. I think I might want to take a break from this for a little bit. So I might end the live stream. So why don't you let me know if you have any last thoughts? Tell me what you think about this today, because I think we made some good progress. We started the spread. There was a lot of work to do, and I think now it's getting a little bit easier to see where to go with this, because there's not much more that I think I need to do. I think it's looking pretty good. And it's going to be a lot of fun to figure out how to integrate the text, because I had a few ways that I was doing it before. And I need to give that some thought. Yeah, I think I like the buildings the way they are there. especially once I get that paper texture in there, it's going to keep them from looking too much like digital cutouts. Anyway, I'll find out all kinds of things later that I want to do to this to push it just a little bit further. And this is a really important moment in the book because this begins to set up the importance of her artistic skills and the fact that she likes to draw and create, and how that kind of ties in with her dreams, because she has these dreams and then she draws what's in her dreams, and then what she draws starts to become reality. And so it's an interesting dynamic, and I take my time explaining that to the reader because I want to really live in this world. Tater Tattoons, hey, there's my buddy. Good to see you. Let's see. Tater Tattoon. I just cannot stop saying that name. I love it. Tater Tattoons. Tater Tattoon says, been really cool. Just caught at the tail end, but that's looking stunning. I love the sense of warmth I'm getting from the colors and lighting. You know what's funny about that is that we had established that at the beginning as being a goal for today. So that's great, because when we started earlier at the beginning of the stream, I think it was a little bit too cold overall as a piece, and the objective today was to try and get some of that warmth in there. And I think we can push it a little bit more. Certainly, I like to do a little bit of post-processing on it to push the colors a little bit more in a particular direction. I kind of heighten the contrast a little bit, and I can also give it a little bit of a color temp so we can make it a bit warmer as well, especially as we move from left to right. In fact, one of the really cool things that you can do, and I'll just kind of show you this. Nope, I don't have enough. God, the layer thing is annoying. You know what? I can merge together the legs now with the rest of the line because I'm happy with that. All right. On top of everything, I make an overlay layer, and then I do a gradient. So I'm going to use an airbrush. This is going to look crazy at first, but then it will make more sense as I go. So I'm going to start with kind of a purple, maybe blue, and I'm going to go up pretty high with the value. So I have this huge brush here. If this crashes, then don't be surprised. But I'm going to paint with this giant brush. It's going to blow the colors out a lot here. And I'm just going to kind of go over the whole thing here. And then as we go from left to right, I'm going to change the color from being a blue purple to being more of a reddish, and then eventually a magenta. And every time I go over this, I'm favoring a bit more of the right side of the page. And again, it's way too intense, but bear with me. And then I'm going to end up in the corner down here. I'm going to use just a little bit of maybe an orange color, okay? And then if I turn the opacity of this layer down, we're going to get a really cool color effect. It just blows it up. Kind of lights, as Bob Ross would say, it lights it on fire. So I might leave it at around 30, because you don't want to go too crazy with this, because it does kind of maybe make things a little bit too crazy. In fact, I might eliminate some of it from the left side here, because I don't think we need quite that much purple over here. All right, and maybe I'll add a little bit of that orange down here on the left side of the page, because she's still in her little bubble here. And if I add some of that orange, it's also gonna mix nicely with what's on the right side. I've already turned the opacity of this layer down pretty far, so I don't have to worry about going nuts. I think there's probably an opportunity to add a bit of color into the sky. Maybe that's something that I'll do that will blow this out a bit more. overlay layers are your friend when you're working with trying to intensify the colors that you're using. It's so powerful that you can go pretty nuts with it. Yeah, I'll play with that a little bit more. And as I do more color temping, as I do kind of a post processing on it, that's going to get amplified too. And sometimes when I do this kind of overlay, it's kind of overkill. But it's a very cool effect. And depending on the page, it might really be an advantage. All right, what do we think, folks? I think I'm going to sign off. And so if you have any last questions, go ahead and ask them. And otherwise, I'm going to sign off here in just a second. But I do have to say, I think we made something pretty cool here today. So you being here made it possible. Couldn't have done it myself. Isn't that neat? Isn't that neat to know that you did that? Because I didn't do anything. I've just been sitting here. All right. Okay, folks, I'm going to sign off until next time. I'm trying to make these a little bit more regular, and we might have to adjust the time of day a little bit for them. I know that some of the folks in Europe who were curious about joining up on these have said that this is a little late for them. I mean, to be fair, I think when we started at 7, that's in England, I think it's about midnight. So that's kind of tough because people seem to like evenings, but of course, some evenings are some people's late nights and other people's early mornings. And so it's a little bit difficult to get the time just right for everybody, but we're gonna fine tune as we go. And I kind of like the idea of doing them at different times of day. We might try doing some in the morning, might try some in the afternoon, and whatever seems to work for other people. I'm getting a little bit more comfortable doing these, and that's just one of those things. Like anything, you got to jump into it and you get used to it. And I think as long as we're not really doing horrible spoilers for the stories, then I think we can keep these up. And also, I thought it would be fun to do a couple of these that would not directly involve work that I'm doing for books, and maybe have things like let people bring their own characters, and I can do a drawing of ideas that you have, and we can just have some fun together doing stuff like that. Also, it might be kind of cool to do commissions and things like that live. So we'll see what the future brings and what people are interested in. And Helena, thank you. I'm just happy to get to see you work on some more of your beautiful art. Well, thank you. You helped make it beautiful just by being here. So thank you. All right. Well, I'm going to sign off. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.